Martial Peak. Chapter 5991. Reappearance of the Nine Palaces Formation. The 8 divine spirits broke through the heavy blockade of the royal lords and headed straight towards Zhang Ruoxi, who did not remain idle either. At this moment, she released a powerful burst of energy and tore through the besiegement of the royal lords to join the divine spirits as soon as possible. With the power of the new 9 Palaces Formation, the original crisis that loomed over her was resolved in an instant. When Zhang Ruoxi united with the 8 divine spirits, a huge change took place in the overall situation. Martial Peak. The human race army escorting the divine spirits did not stop forging ahead and instead acted like a raging current that swept across the royal lords to keep the 2 returning to their original battlefield failed as soon as Zhang Ruoxi came to the latter's help from the small stone race of her sword. The 2 armies reunited once more and resumed their endless battle against the Black Ink Clan army. Assistance. At this point, immediately struck out was completely destroyed and the suppressing Black Ink fortress had been shattered. Most of the warships were also gone with just a few barely surviving. Earth-shattering the human race no longer had many external aids to rely upon at this last juncture of the war. However, the only thing they had left was the barrier of flesh and blood. The other royal lords immediately took the opportunity to leave with numerous wounds on his body, causing blood and flesh to splatter everywhere. Hands, surrounded by many royal lords in all directions, she murmured abandoning all defenses. We won't have much time. He switched to a violent offensive instead. As time passed, the royal lords steadily perished. When the number of royal lords besieging the bodies of dropped to half their original number, but even the powerful restraints and shackles holding him down could no longer be sustained. Air was freed. Dangers. Afterwards, his offensive became increasingly violent and vicious. The divine together with who joined up with her would eventually slaughter a few more royal lords around him. Even if their physical bodies somehow managed to endure, the remaining royal lords could no longer withstand the pressure of the assault and scattered in various directions. Yang Xiao and Su Yan were among the 8 divine spirits. Did not give chase, but instead took the opportunity to rush towards members. She could not lose this fight over the royal lords. Even setting aside the weakness of the divine spirits, she had resolved Aer's predicament by killing off many of the royal lords in the encirclement with her strength alone. She was burning the Heaven's Order bloodline in her body forces just to forcefully maintain a balance the remaining royal lords. Yin and Yang. How were they supposed to survive this onslaught? Doing everything they could to assist her, was not looking good for them. It would not be long before the balance would be broken, and her bloodline was burned out entirely, fled in all directions. Forcing down her worries, Ada naturally flew into a rage and chased after the fleeing royal towards her enemies. But his movements were slow and clumsy due to his enormous size. The sudden burst of power left the royal lord scrambling in a panic. By Aer. One after another, the royal lords lost his ability to think rationally, human race army looked around and realized that there were no other enemies around. He immediately turned around and lashed out several rounds and led the divine spirits to attack her and lose balance. With the victory of the 9 Palaces Formation, Ada realized that Zhang Ruoxi suffered a heavy price for victory, and his anger immediately vanished. She had once more become 30% of their original numbers swept across the battlefield. As for the human race army, every charge resulted in the deaths of only royal and the entire human race army assembled together. There was no doubt that even the number of Ninth Order Masters vision wise Zhang more than half, she had decided to rescue the Ninth Order Masters and she had the opportunity to help them. The power of them were those who advanced beat them up together. Although they managed to break through to the Ninth Order, she did not stop. They barely had any around to stabilize forward and swing her sword. Compared to the veteran 9 divine spirits following behind her were covered in control over their own strength. The 9 Palaces Formation on the main battlefield, heavy burden on their bodies. There were also many only reason they could maintain their fight at all was because the divine spirits had extremely heavy control over their own bodies. Was ultimately changes allowed the allied army to heaven-shattering burst by doing rang out soon after their bodies on the verge of collapse. Screamed and they joined at the top of their voices. The bones and Yang Zhao's support had been shattered. Everything had gotten better. Meanwhile, the situation was bound internal soldiers were crushed. The higher-ups on the other side also bleeding from her several she was relentlessly chasing down the finally extremely ghastly. Her speed was extraordinary. For some time, with Zhang Ruoxi, she suddenly felt a change in the battle barriers of space and appear still any one of the royal Black Ink Clan could rise once more. None survived the fighting of the Heaven's Order sword. The 9 Palaces Formation became the 8 Trikai had not shown up either. Scattered and fled in all directions. These 2 were battling each other somewhere in the depths of the void. Their actions simply accelerated the arrival of their death distressed her greatly. When the royal lords finally realized their pain in her heart, they hastily gathered together once more. She did not dare uncheck the identity of the deceased. There were only so much time royal lords remaining. She could only no longer judge the situation had down her enemies. For that reason, surrounding and besieging the giant took a brief moment to rest and reorganize their formation after their victory. She looked around with very they began marching into the depths of the void in hopes of helping the situation on the main battlefield. There was only one piece of good news that clan had already lost the battle. Yang Kai was definitely alive. As long as they had the supreme They would never be defeated. Her entire body was covered in countless wounds. Those and the fresh blood could only mean that young Kai currently had dealing with exchange blows with MO. She had not been too passive through the cycle of the primordial heaven source battle. With these considerations in mind, after all, the royal human race already but did not attack their eyes. Not to mention, they weighted their bodies and throughout the defensive posture. They were capable of withstanding the heaven's high-rank lacking hands could be found everywhere. Jean Ruoshi smiled slightly, even though her complexion was to worry about when she entered a battle formation perfectly aligned with her desires. Even though there were so many times when she could not dodge in different directions, all their military strength to bear the brunt of the earlier battle, or the divine contrary clan had been completely wiped out as a result. She had taken more damage and shots were nothing more than decoration. Needless to say, however, situation was not that she had the army was not failed to handle the situation properly. 8 divine spirits gigantic forced their way to catastrophic consequences to help her. Those figures were none other behind her. She exhaled lightly and stabilized the outcome of her body and unstable. When she looked harder to determine if the surrounding her began to boil. Although she was heartbroken, transformed into the battlefield. Jean Ruoshi was relieved to see that there was a high possibility that the battle would have ended with the defeat. She had to act swiftly. Were certainly worthy of being the strongest among the divines. Were so clones of MO. Besides, so MO had to inject a strand of his soul into the peak of their cultivation for a long time. Without a strand of another reason why they managed to refuse giant spirit gods were nothing mattered everywhere. She's released the battle. There was nothing the blacking clan could do about the blacking anxiously urged, even if they wanted to Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan immediately released control over their source. The entire incident seemed to last for only a brief moment. The Allied army increased hollow-eyed divine spirits, however, feeling that Hunting Luan's expressions muffled groans of pain as they steadily marched forward. They had not been aware of the Allied army with the intention to help leader with the dismembered wave, but he also knew that MO was over them when the survivors opposite her looked petrified. All the bones in Yang Zhao's legendary creation as he revealed even in the Allied army there tasted massive numbers. Changing into that dragon be of much help to young royal lords like themselves were as weak as ants. The injuries might be nevertheless human form. Something unexpected occurred. It was no longer under the horrified that the Allied army would provide any help to young Kai. She's 90,000 but whether the Allied army could even continue the vitality that enveloped her body also became extremely as they marched forward was weak and unstable. On the other hand, the battle up ahead terrifying aura of the divine spirit revealed even now. The mere fallout was enough to shake the entire void. One of the royal lords yelled and constantly spread out from the depths of the void had extreme enough to neither of these two so they immediately noticed the changes when Zhang Ruoshi showed up soon realized that the intensity of the battle between Yang Kai and the royal was unprecedented. She turned to look at Su Yan, and it was evident that the Allied army charged not without hesitation. Su Yan's body was breaking apart through Zhang Ruoshi's eyes to approach the battle. She struggled to lift the heavens orders their way forward. The human race, they would be overcame divine spirit after obtaining her phoenix sword. Considering the situation for a time, the phoenix smile appeared on her face over the years, but her hands did not loosen their grip on the sword. She integrated into her generation phoenix answered calmly to become a pure blood member of the phoenix clan. Be that as it may, her foundation and physique were still inferior compared to someone born and raised in the phoenix clan. A small group traveled for some time to watch situation barely into another chaotic dead territory, failed to pull through. There was no denying that Big Sister Lan was much better evidently noticed when it came to Yan's matter whether they were a ninth order master or not a ninth order divine spirit, her death who was covered in victory to the human race, and looked down at her hands by herself without a second thought. Stood in the void with the azure dragon remembrance flashed through her eyes as if she lost her life. Raising her head once more, she looked at the weeping Zhang Ruoshi and smiled. In addition, the power of the two ancient spear contained a heaven-destroying earth-shattering the enormous void would become another chance of manifestation of space-time river. He had completely failed and absorbed the last message to him should be eradicated. And although he was robbed of many benefits by human race army scattered across the battlefield, Zhang Ruoshi had already destined to his limits. Her tears streaming down her face and the human race had been fighting for millions of years just to also known as the flame of rebirth. The stolen benefits had only stepped away some of the known strength so much to know about such things. How could Zhang Ruoshi destroy the flame of rebirth did not always succeed? It was the result he obtained after countless near-death encounters with MO. The Phoenix clan ability 995 space-time river into the shape not undoubtedly after a brief hesitation control of the power of she abruptly returned to the Phoenix. She no longer born as a new member of the Phoenix clan had never experienced before either. She could only marshal the slightest negligence would lead to his death. And he had indeed suffered several near-death royal lords pursued Zhang Ruoshi. Even more fortunate that he had always managed to avoid the worst outcome at the last moment. The price of her rescue was vicious attacks had allowed Yang Kai to divine spirits who came to help her had lost their lives in battle. He had been no match for them from the beginning to the end, but it had only taken him a few days by the unexpected had already set one originally the gates of Yang Kai could only absorb and finished speaking to Zhang Ruo by force. Her entire body dissolved into a tiny space of fluorescent light. Several other figures stepped out from the void and condensed into as much of Ling's last gift as possible. It was her phoenix flame, the allied army had completely seized the initiative on the main battlefield had been very generation of temper and refinement, who lived back in the elation of strengths and every Ruo she anxiously stared at the small priestess control over the power of the battle was no longer in question. The rough and ugly victory was only a matter of time of metal now. The dim blue phoenix was for that reason Yang Kai's understanding of the 10,000 strength noticed Zhang Ruo facing hundreds of royal lords. For the sake of ensuring Zhang Ruo was no weaker than what Zhang Ruo had previously mobilized at her peak. Moreover, who had only just become enveloped in the divine spirit. If he wanted to slaughter and repelling the royal lord, then he had to overcome Zhang Ruo forever. Open heaven realm of the phoenix turned the phoenix nest. Only then would another member of the phoenix reveal Su Yao. That person would no longer be. She took a step forward and came to Zhang Ruo's side. Big Brother Huang's voice abruptly overcome his limitations under these circumstances, causing her to snap back. Not even Mu could achieve such a feat. The more perfectly Zhang Ruo's power to battle, the more aware Yang Kai became of the shortcomings of the field with Zhang Ruo reach a higher level of the martial Tao in such a short span of time for themselves. She would have to spend long years around the weaken and accumulation. In the next moment, she clearly sensed Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan pouring power as he failed to overcome his limitations. She immediately understood the slaughter MO being activated. If he wanted to break the small stone race arms also suffered terrible casualties. He would require more time. The flame that was on the verge of being snulled would allow him to have enough time to grow in flashes of dazzling light of Yellowstone across the space-time river flame. Those flashes were none other than purifying light. Everywhere the light he failed to realize his discovery and dissipated and primordial light left its burden agony. He could now oppose the royal lords and territory lords were perishing all over. The primordial light and this only accelerated the destruction of the times when one simply lacked the necessary transformed into the very boundary royal was finally eliminated. Unfortunately, the same could not be said of MO was a strange existence that was born when heaven and earth split apart. The burning light and the serene glimmer originated from the same source as all divine would never be depleted. Although they could be classified as divine supposedly in the creation realm from ordinary divine spirits. Even if more than 30% of his source because they were the first to split from the primordial light. He was still a mighty being in a realm above the open heaven realm. Be it in terms of the purity or strength of their source, Yang Kai had finally seen the bizarre means of a being in that realm. Incomparable to the burning light strength that permeated the void. Even the dragons and phoenixes were no exception in this regard. The ability to create something out of thin air with the burning light and serene glimmer was a great truly fortunate that Yang Kai's current strength was extraordinary. Could help in the refinement of a divine spirit source and enhance the bloodline of these divine spirits. That was why MO stopped using such ineffective tactics after a few attempts and decided to fight Yang Kai with his own strength instead. He had only just become a 10,000-meter-long grand dragon. The violent aftermath that spread out in all directions caused the void to shudder and crack. His dragon vein improved during one of their confrontations, allowing him to grow to 20,000 meters in sound coming from deep within his heart. The gift of source strength from Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan was also transmitted from his arm and had helped Yang Kai looking down at his arms over the years. He couldn't help being shocked allowing him to become an ancient dragon less than 1,000 years later. Indestructible azure dragon for a member of the dragon clan was unheard of in history. At this moment, the same effect took place when they injected their source strength into the Phoenix Flame. Chapter 5996. The Phoenix Flame reacted as though it suddenly received significant dragon spear was given to Yang Kai by until the small ball of flame gradually resembled a blue-colored Great Sunday Zhang Ruo had accompanied him for thousands of years. Then, during which they experienced numerous battles and slaughtered countless enemies together within the flames. As the spear was an artifact refined from the body of a divine, reached a certain point, its grade was so high that it was practically expanded and exploded. Be that as it may, the sudden turn of events left her dumbfounded. To appear in such an amazing she couldn't help thinking that something extremely awful had happened. The intensity of this battle. However, she immediately revealed an expression of divine dragon could not withstand the force of Mo's attacks. That was because a clear and striking phoenix cry resounded throughout the void when the blue phoenix flame erupted. Quickly followed. It was followed by the unfurling of a giant pair of entire body of the spear was covered in fine cracks. Then the gradual appearance of a beautiful and graceful figure. The spear was on the verge of shattering to pieces. Having received help from the source strength of Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan, a hint of mockery appeared in his eyes and his attacks became fiercer and fiercer. Zhang Ruo she wept tears of joy. A phoenix's rebirth generally came with great risks. If
Then,
they failed,
he thrust
they would
out with
lose
his
their
spear.
life on the spot.
As soon as the
On
violent
the other
forces
hand,
collided with
they
each
would
other,
receive immense
the
benefits
impact
if they
caused his body
succeeded.
to freeze for a
That
moment.
was because the strength of the
spear that
Phoenix
had
clan
accompanied him
members
for
would improve
thousands of years
significantly with each
simultaneously
rebirth.
shattered into a
Not
million
to mention,
pieces in his
Su
hand.
Yen received
Emo
aid
had
from
been
the source
waiting
strength
for
of the
this
burning
very
light and
opportunity.
serene glimmer
When
during
the
her
Azure
rebirth.
Dragon spear
At
shattered
this
to
moment,
pieces,
her ice
he jumped
phoenix
forward
aura
and punched
radiating from the
Yong
flame
Kai.
of rebirth was
This
at a
punch
height
was
that
meant
Su
to
Yen
become
had
the
never been able to
deciding factor
achieve
of
in the
this battle.
past.
She
would
would
not
not
believe
lose
that
even if
Yong Kai
compared
would
to
be
divine
forced to
dragon
avoid his
Fu
blows
Guang.
after losing
She
his
was
weapon.
now a divine
If
spirit
that was the
on
case,
par with a
then he could
veteran
steadily
Ninth Order
press
master.
forward and gain complete control over
While
the
the
flow of the
divine
battle
spirit's
until Yong
population
Kai
was far
became
from their
powerless
peak
to
back in
fight
the
back.
primordial era.
Contrary
There
to
was no small number
expectations,
of them
though,
nowadays.
Yong Kai did not retreat
Nevertheless,
from the blow,
Fu
even
Guang was
after
the
the
only
Azure
living
Dragon
divine
spear
spirit who
shattered
had
to
achieved
pieces.
such a level of
The
power.
space-time river,
Naturally,
which was originally
Yong
wrapped
Kai
around the
could
body
also
of the
be
spear,
included in this list.
seemed to have gained
The rest of the
spirituality
divine
and clung
spirits
tightly
were at
to his
most
arms,
equivalent to peak
facing
Eighth Order
Mo's attack
masters.
directly.
Although these
Yong
divine
Kai threw a
spirits were
punch in
generally
Mo's
stronger
direction.
than average human
The
race
Tao's
masters
strength
at the peak of the
fluctuated
Eighth Order
violently.
Open Heaven realm.
At the moment
That
when
did
both
not change
forces
the fact
collided
that they
with
had
each
yet
other,
to reach the
a
highest
powerful
peak of their
impact
strength.
manifested as a
Therefore,
visible
the
halo
Phoenix
of light
clan no
centered
longer
around
had
the
a
two
designated
opponents'
leader.
flashed.
Much
The
less a
halo of
Phoenix
light
Empress after
swiftly
the
spread
death of
out
the
in
former
all
Dragon and
directions.
Phoenix clan leaders
Everywhere
during
the
the
light
battle in the
passed,
barren territory.
space shattered
Only
and
a
collapsed.
Phoenix who had reached the
It was
realm of
quickly
Ninth
followed
Order
by the
masters
appearance
had the
of
right to
numerous
command the
enormous
Phoenix clan
clan
and
and
vie
vie
for the position
the
of
Ninth
Phoenix
Order
Empress.
masters
who had
Su
arrived
Yen
at the
had
periphery
reached
of the
the peak of the
battlefield
Eighth
turned
Order
pale
Open
with
Heaven
fright.
realm. Faced
In
with the
addition,
approaching
her
fallout of
Phoenix
the
clan
battle,
source had
they
reached a
quickly
realm
summoned their
equivalent to the
strength
Eighth
to
Order.
defend themselves
Having
against the
inherited the
impact.
source of the third-generation
Nevertheless,
Phoenix
they were
Empress,
still sent
she was
flying.
expected to become
They,
a Phoenix
who were no
Empress in
longer
the
at their
future
peak
if she had
strength,
enough time to
were
develop and
instantly
grow.
thrown into
The
disarray by
entire
the
Phoenix
impact.
clan had placed their hopes in her. Nevertheless,
Luckily,
the enhancement
the
of
two
a divine
giant
spirit
spirit
god's
bloodline
stood in
and
front of
source
them
was
and bore the
extremely
brunt of the
difficult.
shockwave.
Even though
It was
Su
only
Yen
thanks to the
repeatedly
protection
entered
of
the Phoenix
Age
nest
and
and cultivator
that
over the
there were no
years,
casualties.
she had remained
Once
stuck at a
the effects
bottleneck.
of the aftermath
She
passed,
simply could not
they couldn't
overcome the
help looking
bottleneck
slightly
and advanced
flustered
to the
and bitter.
final step.
They originally
That was
came
until
here
this
intending
moment.
to help Yong
Su
Kai,
Yen,
who was
halfway
reborn
into the
thanks
journey,
to the flame
the
of
Allied
rebirth,
army was forced
had
to stop at a
finally
distance
shattered her
and
bottleneck.
discontinue their
Her
forward march
bloodline
because
had
the
improved
troops could not
significantly,
withstand the overwhelming
allowing
pressure
her
of the
to
battle.
advance.
At this
She
moment,
even
they were
overcame the
horrified
shackles
to
of the
discover
open
that
heaven
even
realm,
Ninth Order masters
which was
like
nothing
themselves
short of a
could not
miracle.
approach the battlefield.
Amidst the ringing notes
They
of
would
the
be
Phoenix
torn apart
cries,
by the
Su
aftermath
Yen,
of
who
such
had transformed
powerful
into an
attacks.
ice phoenix,
As things
gave
stood,
Zhang
the only
Ruoxi
ones
a
who
slight
could be
nod of
depended upon
acknowledgement.
were the two giant
Then,
spirit gods.
she turned around and charged towards the vast battlefield.
Mi Jingluan looked up at the two behemoths and instantly realized that the two giant
Another
spirit
Phoenix
gods
cry
could not be
sounded a
counted on
moment
either.
later.
The
And a large
survivors
part
were
of the void
exhausted
froze
after
as
the
a
arduous
result.
battle.
Countless
Even
black ink
Ada and
clansmen
Aer
returned
were
into
no
ice
exception.
sculptures that
While
maintained
the
their
two
final
giant
appearance
spirit
before their
gods
deaths,
managed to resist the
drifting
shockwave just
aimlessly
now.
in the void.
They were still
Even
pushed
the
back
surviving royal
significantly by
lords
the
were
impact.
too intimidated by
Under
the
these
icy aura to step
circumstances,
forward and
it was
challenge this new
impossible for
enemy.
any of them to
They were
intervene
certain
in the
that things
battle.
would not end
They
well
would
for them
only
if
be
they
a
were
burden for
touched by
Yong
that kind
Kai
of
if they
power.
recklessly
At the
charged
same
forward.
time,
The
Mi
enormous black
Jingluan
ink
was
cloud
abruptly
that had
struck by
condensed
a
above the
saddening
battlefield was
realization.
also enveloped
The
in
only
huge
thing they
ice
could
crystals.
do after coming here
One
was to
after
witness the
another,
unique battle
Phoenix
with their
cries
own
sounded
eyes.
from various
That was an
directions across the
unimaginably
battlefield.
heartbreaking truth.
It was the Phoenix
When the
clan
aftermath
welcoming their
fully
newly
dissipated,
crowned empress.
everyone looked towards the battlefield from
Their
behind
sonorous
Ade
cries
and
pierced
Aer.
through space itself.
The scene that greeted
Sounding
them
a
made
horn
their
of
hearts tighten
counterattack.
with fear.
Ho!
Yong
A
Kai was
high-pitched
steadily being
dragon
pushed
pushed
back,
sounded next,
seemingly at a
Zhang
complete
Ruoxi,
disadvantage.
who finally managed
Compared
to
to an
collect her
ancient
emotions,
entity like Mo,
looked up into the void
Yong
and saw
Kai's
Yang
heritage
Shao
was
rising
simply
around
too
in his
shallow.
dragon form.
The slightest
The power of the
negligence or
dragon
careless
vein in his body
mistake could become
fluctuated
fatal.
wildly.
Showing faint signs that
During
he
the
was
battle,
about to break through.
Mo suddenly yelled in
Moreover,
frustration.
he was not the only
Yang
one.
Kai flew backwards like an arrow
the
released
final
from the
survivor,
bowstring following
was
a
also
vicious
exhibiting
strike.
similar
The
signs.
space-time river
The
wrapped around
previous
his
battle
arms
was an
suddenly
arduous
emerged
struggle
behind
that
him
they
and
had
he
never
never
into the river,
experienced before.
diffusing some of the
Although their
impacts from the
consciousnesses
blow.
had been dormant
It
at
did
the
not
time,
take long before
their
he
bodies
stepped
did
out
not
of the river
forget the
once
details
more.
of the battle.
His
The enormous
complexion was
pressure
pale,
had brought them
and a
closer to
trickle
the
of
limits
blood
of their
dripped from the
bloodline.
corners of his mouth.
Nonetheless,
Emo did
what
not
truly
pursue
allowed
Yang
them to
Kai.
break through their limits was the
He
pure
simply
source
stared
strength of the
coldly
burning
and calmly
light and
stated,
serene glimmer which
"My
had poured
offer
into
from
them.
before still
Both
stands.
Yang Shao and
Give
Pai
up your
Xiu were
feudal
bearers of the
resistance
great
and
sun
hand
and moon
over
marks,
Mu's inheritance,
which were the manifestation of a
guarantee
piece
that
of
the
the burning
human
light
race will
and
have a
serene
place to
glimmer
live in the
source.
future."
In order to
Yang
successfully
Kai
form
turned
the
his
Nine
head to the
Palaces
side and
formation with
spat out a
Zhang
mouthful of
Ruoxi,
blood.
Big Brother
Then
Wang
he
and Big
grinned
Sister Lan
wickedly.
had integrated
"Kill
their
me,
marks
then
into
you
the
can deal
divine
with the
spirits
human
and
race
assumed
as you
control over
please."
their bodies.
Emo closed his
Hence,
eyes gently.
all 8 of the divine
When he
spirits
opened them
received
once
the blessing
more,
of the burning
his
light and the
murderous
serene
intent
glimmer source
overflowed,
strength, which stimulated the growth of their bloodline greatly. The
He
benefits
did not
that they
bother to
obtained
speak
after
again,
surviving
and
their
his figure
near-death
abruptly
experience were
vanished from where he was
unimaginable.
standing.
The power
By the
of
time
Yang
he
Zhao's
reappeared
dragon
again,
vein boiled.
he was already
He
standing
roared
in front of
endlessly,
Yang Kai.
filled with the faint
sudden
realization
disappearance
that
and
he had touched
reappearance
up the
were not a
barrier
trick
that
of
hindered
space
his
principles.
growth. As long as
Rather,
he could break
his
through
speed
this
had simply
barrier,
reached such an extreme.
he would be able to
Yang
successfully
Kai did
become
not
a
seem
divine
surprised
dragon.
by these
He
movements.
had been under tremendous
With a
mental
backward grab,
pressure ever
the
since he
space-time
returned from
river
the
that was
universe
originally
furnace.
flowing behind him
Although Yang
transformed into
Shui
a
had
whip
advanced to the
and appeared
ninth
in his
order,
hand.
He
The
remained
long whip
stuck
then
as an
lashed
ancient
out towards
dragon.
Momo frowned slightly
Consequently,
but did not dodge
there were
aside.
many occasions
He
in which
simply
they could no
punch
longer
instead.
fight side by
The
side
punch
with
struck
each other.
young Kai
The
squarely
main
in the
reason
head.
was the difference
The
in their
blow
strengths,
made his head arch
which
backwards,
caused him to become a
and his
burden
skull
for
seemed
Yang
to crack
Xueqi.
from the impact.
For this reason,
He was
Yang Xiao
immediately
had been
drenched in
desperately
blood.
trying to improve his bloodline.
Nevertheless, the long
He had
whip
asked
wrapped
Fu
around
Guang for
Mo.
advice on countless
Standing
occasions.
so close to each other,
But the path
the
to becoming a
blood-drenched
divine
young Kai
dragon
grinned
was
at
not
Mo.
easy.
I
Even
finally
with Fu
caught you.
Guang's careful guidance,
He seemed to have
he
been
simply
waiting
could
for
not
this
find a way
moment.
to overcome his
After he
bottleneck.
finished speaking,
The number of people
he
in
gave
each
the long
generation
whip
of the
in his hand
Dragon
a
Clan
sharp
who could
flick.
successfully
The
advance to
space-time
become
river
divine
manifested
dragons
once
could always
more,
be counted
and
on
the
one
raging
hand.
currents
Most
instantly
of the
engulfed
time,
the two
the Dragon
figures.
Clan had only
Before
one
the
divine
figures
dragon,
vanished from view,
and even at the peak of the
master
Dragon
standing in
Clan,
the distance
there had
vaguely
only
heard
been a
Mo's
total of
mocking
3
voice
divine
sounding in their
dragons.
ears.
At this
Since you're
moment,
so eager to
Yang
die,
Xiao could
I will
almost see
fulfill
his
your
breakthrough
wishes.
on the horizon. Afterwards, the space-time river
He
that
knew that
stretched
this
out
might
into
be
the
his
void
opportunity
suddenly
to
boiled
overcome
and
his
bubbled
bottleneck.
violently. Therefore,
Meanwhile,
he could not
the
afford to
Grand
miss
Tao's
it.
strength
In
trembled
order to break
agitatedly.
through the shackles of
These
his
were the
bloodline,
results of the
he
battle
was willing
between
to
Yang Kai
sacrifice
and Mo
everything
in the space-time
The
river.
same was true for
The
Pai
Ninth Order
Xiao.
Open Heaven
While the
Realm
Dragon and
Masters
Phoenix
couldn't help being
clans generally
extremely
had the
nervous
protection
at
of
the
a Dragon
sight.
Emperor or a
The
Phoenix
space-time
Empress
river
in
was
each
the condensed
generation.
crystallization
No
of Yang
equivalent
Kai's
divine spirit
10,000
had appeared
grand
among the
Taos.
rest of the divine
Even if
spirits
fighting
since
in
the
the
end of the
space-time
primordial
river would
era.
give him a
The
considerable
primordial
advantage
era
over
had
his
been the
opponent,
turning point for the
that was
divine
not enough to
spirits,
overcome the
who
fact
lost
that
the
Mo's
blessings of the
cultivation was
heavens
in a
and
higher
earned the
realm
malice
than
of the
his.
universe instead.
Besides,
During
the
the
Ninth
primordial
Order Open
era,
Heaven Realm
the
Masters
divine
had seen the
spirits had been
previous battle
favored
with
of
their
the
own
heavens.
eyes.
They were
Under Mo's
unrestrained
powerful
in their
offensive,
actions,
Young
doing
Kai
whatever
could
they
only
wanted
parry
without
and
any
defend at
fear
most.
or scruples.
He had no
Their
strength
reign
to fight
came
back
to an end
whatsoever.
after countless years
That was
of
the
warring
result
against
of the
each other for
undeniable
dominance,
gap in their
and
strengths.
they were eventually supplanted
Rashly
by the
dragging
monster
his
race.
enemy into the
By that
space-time river
point,
was both an
countless
opportunity
divine
and a
spirits
danger.
had perished.
If he failed to defeat Mo in
the
the
blessing
space-time
and
river,
favor of the heavens
then he would not
gradually
be able to
shifted to the
guarantee
monster
his own
race.
safety in the space-time
Innumerable
river.
divine spirits
The
were
churning
again
of the
wiped
river
out
waters
during the
became
early ancient era
increasingly
when the monster
turbulent.
race ruled.
Waves
And the
rose
number
and
of
fell,
divine spirits who
splashing
survived
around
was less
fiercely.
than 1% of their
At the
numbers
same
at their
time,
peak.
countless
If the monster
Tao's
race
strength
had
continued
continued
to
to reign
disappear
over the universe,
mysteriously.
the divine
Although the
spirits
Ninth
would have
Order
gone
Masters
extinct
could not see
completely.
the ongoing battle.
Even the Dragon
They
and
could
Phoenix
deduce that
clans
Young
would
Kai
not
was
be
at
a
a
disadvantage
disadvantage
just by
What
looking at the
happened
changes
next
in
was
the
amusing
space-time river.
indeed.
The
The monster
situation
race
lasted for
ultimately
several
walked down the
days.
same path as the divine spirits after they overthrew the reign of the divine
Ninth Order
spirits.
Masters were about
Once
to rush
again,
forward to
the
help
blessing
when the
and
churning
favor of
river
the heavens
suddenly
shifted,
turned calm,
now
with
falling
their
upon the
hearts in their
human
throats.
race.
They
It was for
watched the
that reason
space-time
that the
river
divine
intently.
spirits cooperated
They
with the
knew that
human
the
race.
outcome of the battle
By
had been
taking
decided.
shelter under the wings of
Mi
the human
Jinglun
race,
immediately
they
sent a
managed to
transmission
preserve
to
the
his
lives of the
companions,
surviving divine
ordering them to be
spirits
ready
until
for
today.
action at any time.
In short,
A
the
figure
divine
suddenly
spirits
stepped
lost
out
the
of the
favor of
river.
the heavens after
To their
the primordial
horror,
era,
the figure
and
that
could no
stepped
longer
out turned out
reproduce
to
the
be not
glory
one
of their
but two
ancestors.
figures.
The greatest
Mo
sign
held
of their
Young Kai
decline
by
was
the
the huge
head,
reduction in the
dragging
number of
him with
divine
one
spirits
hand.
that could touch
Young
what was
Kai
equivalent
hung
to the
limply
Ninth
from
Order
Mo's
Open
grasp
Heaven
as though
realm.
every bone in his
Only
body
those
had been
born in the
broken.
Dragon Clan and Phoenix Clan had produced such masters after the primordial era. It had to be said that every single
Martial
divine
Peak.
spirit clan had the
Chapter
protection of their respective Ninth Order divine
Space-Time
spirits
Shadow.
during the primordial
Standing
era.
above the
In
space-time
fact,
river,
their
Mo
numbers
held
could range
Young
from a
Kai's
few
head
to
as though
several
holding
dozen
a chicken
in
in
each
his grasp
divine
and
spirit
snorted,
clan back then.
"Useless waste.
Countless eons had
You
passed
don't have
since
the
then,
right to
and
continue
at this
living."
moment, there was a
Then,
Paishio who finally
he abruptly
experienced the
exerted
opportunity
great
to
strength in
overcome
his
the shackles
hand.
of his
How
bloodline
could
on this
Young
vast
Kai,
battlefield,
who had lost his
he was
ability to
ecstatic
fight,
beyond
withstand
imagination,
such an attack?
forcefully
His
enduring
head
the damage
instantly
caused by his
exploded from the
injuries.
impact.
He pushed his
However,
bloodline power
Mo
with
did not
reckless
stop
abandon.
there.
It punched out and smashed the crippled
vitality
body to
surrounding
pieces.
his body
The
became
scene
more and
was
more
imprinted in
intense
the
as
eyes
time
of the
passed.
Ninth Order Masters
All over
who
the
were watching the
battlefield,
battle from
the
afar.
divine spirits
They
revealed
stood
their
frozen
true
in
bodies
shock
and
and
stared
stared
in
in
disbelief.
disbelief. If
Young
Su
Kai
Yan's
died,
transformation was
the
a
man
joyous
who was the
event
best
for the
at
Phoenix
creating
Clan,
miracles and turning
then
the tides of
Paishio's
war
current
countless
state was a
times.
joyous event
The
for all
man
the
who
divine
had saved the
spirits.
human race from various
of whether he
catastrophes?
succeeded in
Did
overcoming
he
his
die
bottleneck
just
or
like
not?
that?
He had
They
already given the
instinctively
other
refused to
divine
believe the
spirits a
seen
glimpse
glimpse
of
of
hope,
hope.
and subconsciously wondered whether they were looking at an illusion. Marshall peak.
However, the dissipation
Chapter
of his aura that followed the
5993,
destruction of
the
his
mighty
body could
current
not
of
be
the dragon
faked.
pool.
Everything
On the main
indicated
battlefield,
that he was really
the difficult
dead.
situation
Young
faced by the
Kai had
Allied
died at
army
the
had been
hands of
greatly
Mo.
eased.
Only
All
a short
thanks to
moment had
Zhang
passed from the
Ruoxi.
time Young Kai
The
was
Black
dragged
Gate
out of the
clan had
space-time
paid an
river by
exorbitant
Mo.
price to take down
Moreover,
Zhang Ruoxi.
Mo had not
Resulting in
hesitated
the
in
loss of hundreds of
when he
royal
killed Young
lords and
Kai.
yielding less than
Everything
desirable
happened so
results.
quickly that the
If
Ninth Order
human race
Masters
army
had no time to
desperately
even think
escorted the
about
eight
rescuing
divine
Young
spirits to aid
Kai.
her at the last
A
moment.
shrill but
The
mournful
Black Gate
phoenix
clan's
cry
plans
rang
to kill
out,
Zhang Ruoxi would
accompanied
most
by a
likely have
furious
succeeded.
dragon roar.
And once she was dead,
Su Yan and
there would no
Yang
longer
Shao
be anybody on
transformed
the
into their
battlefield
divine
with sufficient
spirit
strength
forms
to
and
pose a
charged
threat to the
towards
Black
Mo.
Gate clan.
The rest
At
of the
that
Ninth
moment,
Order
the
Masters
two
also
giant
followed
spirit
suit
gods
and
were
sprang
trapped
into
by
action.
over 100 royal
Despite
lords.
knowing that they were
They
no
were
match
too
for
busy
Mo,
fending for themselves
nobody
to spare any
hesitated in the
energy to
slightest.
rescue the human
Now
race
that Young
army.
Kai was dead,
Fortunately,
there was nobody
Zhang
in this world who
Ruoxi
could compete
eventually
with Mo
won the
lacking
battle.
strength would
The
soon
price of
gain
her
complete
victory was the
control over
lives
the
of
universe.
5 divine spirits.
When that happened,
but all the
the
royal
human
lords
race would no
surrounding and
longer have a
besieging
place
her
to
had been
live.
eliminated in
This was
exchange.
the final struggle.
Furthermore,
Xueqi had successfully been crowned as the Phoenix Empress.
The Tao of Space was
the
the
enormous
bloodline
figure of
talent
the
of the
Ice
Phoenix
Phoenix
clan.
radiated with a
She had lost her mind
after
being
being
everything in
by
its
her
way.
feelings of rage
Even
and
space
sorrow.
itself was
At
no
this
exception.
moment,
There was
be
only
that as
one
it
thought
may,
left in her
the
heart.
situation remained
She wanted
bleak.
revenge.
The Black
and if she
Ink
could
clan
not
had
have
twice
it,
as many
she would
troops as
accompany
the Allied
Yong Kai
army,
to the afterlife,
which gave them a numerical
a gorgeous
advantage
trail
that was
of light
difficult to
lingered
overcome.
behind the enormous blue
Furthermore,
figure.
not all
With
of
a
the
few
royal
flickers,
lords had been
she
eliminated
arrived
in
on the
skirmish with
battlefield.
Xueqi.
However,
A
a bizarre
bizarre
phenomenon
occurred
occurred
before
before
she
could
could
unleash
unleash
her
the situation
strength.
on the main
Ripples
battlefield
suddenly
despite their
emerged in
attempt
the
to kill
originally
Zhang
calm
Ruoxi.
space-time river.
At this moment,
Following the
difference
splashing
in
waves,
strength between the
a
two
figure
sides had
leapt
not
out.
shrunk, but
Upon
instead
seeing the
increased
appearance of the figure,
significantly.
The main cause for
froze in
this was that
shock.
the small stone
Even the
race
Ninth
died
Order
at a much
masters
faster
behind
rate
her
than
were
the Black Ink
dumbfounded
clan.
by the sight.
Xueqi's rebirth had only managed to help stabilize the
figure who
situation
stepped
by
out
a
from the
small
space-time
margin.
river was
The
none
human
other than
race
Yong
army
Kai,
would need an even
who should have
greater
been killed
injection
by
of
Mo
strength to
earlier.
prevent things from
He's
deteriorating.
alive.
Much less win
Everybody
the battle.
stared at the
A
scene in front of them
wave
of
of dragon
disbelief.
roars
Their
reverberated
reactions
throughout
were
the
similar
void.
to when they
When
watched
the
Yong
power of
Kai
Yang
being
Zhao's
killed just
dragon
now
bane reached a
he
certain
had
limit.
clearly died
The
right
aura
before
of
the
the
divine
very
dragon
eyes,
erupted,
and his death had
then
not been
the
an
body
illusion.
of a 100,000
Nevertheless,
meter-long white
he
dragon
just
emerged
walked out of the
its
space-time
enormous
river
dragon
alive.
head rising
The
high
bizarre
above,
phenomenon was
overlooking
beyond
all
their
living creatures
comprehension.
from a lofty height.
This kind of
Yang
resurrection
Zhao had
after death
succeeded
was
in
simply
ascending to the
impossible.
realm of divine
After
dragon.
stepping out from the
At the
surging
same
waves,
time,
the
Yang
aura of
Kai
the Ninth Order
immediately
divine
noticed
spirit
Xueqi and the others.
radiated from Pai
He seemed to have anticipated the
divine
current situation and breathed out
to
help
deeply.
Zhang Ruoxi.
I'm glad I made
and
it back in time.
Though 5 had died in battle,
Step
the
back.
remaining 3 had successfully
Xueqi,
overcome
who
their
had
respective
transformed
shackles
into an
and
ice
risen to
phoenix,
greater heights.
only hesitated for a brief moment before she
It was
turned
important
around
to
and
note
retreated
that the difference
backwards.
in impact a
She
Ninth Order
also
divine
manipulated
spirit like
space
Pai
principles
could
and
play on the
quickly
battlefield
transported
compared
the
to a
people
newly
behind her
advanced
away from
Ninth
the
Order human
battlefield.
master was
The
enormous.
Ninth Order masters
That was
were
because
forcefully
the divine
returned to their
spirits were
previous
inherently
positions.
stronger than Ninth Order
This
humans
location
by a
could
large
barely be
margin.
considered
As
safe
soon
from
as
the
Yang
aftermath
Zhao
of
and
the
Pai
battle.
joined forces
Xiang
and
Shan
charged into
frowned
the
deeply.
battlefield.
What just
A large
happened?
swath was cut
Yang
into the ranks
Kai
of the
had
Black
clearly been
Ink clan
killed.
army.
So how did
The
he come back
overwhelming
alive
aura
from
of
the
the divine
space-time river?
spirits flooded the void,
Although Xiang Shan
causing
had lived for
countless
many
Black Ink
years,
clan
he
soldiers
had
to
never
perish.
encountered such a
In the
bizarre
distant
sight
void,
before.
a
Another
light
silver
flashed
divine
through
dragon was
Jingluan's
rampaging
eyes.
across the
Creation
battlefield.
realm.
His
Could it
entire
be the
body was
mysteries
drenched
of the
in blood,
creation realm?
and many of his tough
What do
dragon
you mean?
scales had been torn or blasted
Yang
off.
Lai raised an
This
eyebrow
silver
at those
divine
words.
dragon was
Are
none
you
other
saying
than
that
Fu
Yang
Guang.
Kai has stepped into the
Regardless
creation
of his
realm?
immense strength,
He
Mi
was bound to
Jingluan shook
sustain
his head.
injuries in such a
It doesn't
chaotic
seem
and
like
intense
it.
battlefield.
The Yang Kai
When
who
Fu
stepped out of
Guang
the
saw
space-time
Yang
river
Zhao
only
charging
had
into
the
the
aura of a
battlefield
Ninth
after
Order
becoming a
master.
divine dragon.
It did not seem
He
as though he had
immediately rushed
ascended to a
over
new
towards him.
realm.
At
Be
the
that
same
as it
time,
may, a
Mi
series of dragon
Jingluan had
roars
no
were
other
exchanged
explanation
between
for the
them,
bizarre
as though
phenomenon
they were
that they just
communicating with
witnessed.
each other.
What's more,
It did not take
could
long
reaching
before
the
Yang
creation
Zhao
realm
seemed to
really
understand
allow
the
one to
situation,
revive from the dead.
and he quickly sliced a bloody path through his enemies to approach Fu Guang.
On the battlefield,
A short while later,
Missouri watched
the two
Yang
divine
Kai
dragons
reappear from
gathered
the
at the
space-time
same
river
place
and turned to look
in
at the
terms of
scattered
size
pieces
alone,
of the dismembered
Fu
body.
Guang was undoubtedly
After confirming
larger
that
than
he had
Yang
indeed
Zhao.
slaughtered Yang
This
Kai
was only
earlier,
natural, as
he
Fu
immediately
Guang had
understood
been a
the
divine
situation.
dragon for a much
A
longer
shadow.
time. The two
Yang Kai
behemoths began to draw
smiled at
upon the power
Mo.
of their
I can't
dragon
fool your
veins,
eyes after all.
causing their
Mo
vitality
and
to
Mo
surge
had
and
lived
boil
together
within
for
them.
such a long time.
That was not all.
It was only
They
natural
also
for
began
Mo
to
to
spin
know
in
about
circles
Mo's
at a high
methods.
speed.
Besides,
With their bodies connected
two identical
together from
individuals
end to
could
end.
not exist
In the
together
beginning,
unless they
their
originated
figures
from
could still
different
be seen.
spacetimes.
However,
Mo's shadow
they soon
technique
blurred
had
into a
transcended the
rapidly
limits of the
rotating blur.
mundane.
In
Something
order to
could vaguely
suppress
be
and
seen
seal
amidst
Mo's
the
source,
rapidly spinning
she had
circle
divided
of
her
light,
entire life
as
into
though being
3,000
summoned into
shadows to
existence.
protect the
Many
3,000
of the
universe
royal
worlds
lords
in the
inside
Black
her
Ink
space-time
clan
army
army. Couldn't help
Each
feeling
shadow represented
uncomfortable
a
at the
part of her
sight.
past.
Although they
An
did not
illusion
know
of
what the two
sorts that was
divine
also
dragons
real
were
and
attempting,
tangible.
they knew that their actions would undoubtedly be detrimental to the Black
Yang
Ink
Kai
clan.
had obtained
They had
Mu's
to stop
final
the divine
gift.
dragons at all
Devouring
costs.
and refining
Hence,
her space-time
more
river
than a dozen
had allowed
loyal
him
lords
to
immediately
massively
rush
increase the
towards the
volume
two
of his
divine
own
dragons from
space-time
various
river.
directions.
At the same time, Despite their efforts, though,
he also enhanced
another
and
shocking
improved his
scene entered their
attainments and
eyes before they
comprehension
could
of the
approach the
10,000
divine
grand
dragons.
The
Under the
benefits
joint
he
efforts of the
received
two
were
divine
enormous.
dragons,
Nevertheless,
a large amount of turbid
those
liquid
were not
suddenly
his
gushed
greatest
out from the
gains.
dazzling circle
The
of
greatest
light.
benefit he
The
obtained
unknown
was
liquid
Moo's
splattered
shadow
across the
technique.
void like a spray
That
of
secret
mist from a
technique
mountain
was
spring,
definitely the pinnacle
covering
of the
everything
mysteries
around
of the
them.
Grand Das.
Then, a
After
torrent of
fighting
water
Mo,
emerged and swept
young
out in
Kai
all
had deeply
directions.
understood that he was no match for his opponent.
Many of the divine
That was
spirits
because
who
he could
knew
not
what was
overcome
happening
his
couldn't
limits
help
and
feeling
advance
moved
to a
by the
higher
scene
realm
before
within a
them.
short time.
They knew that the
As long
Dragon
as he
Clan
could not
had brought out
advance
their
to a higher
strongest
realm,
trump card in
then
order
his
to
battle
obtain
with Mo
victory
would
in this
only
war.
end with his
The
defeat and
torrent
death.
gushing into the
Be
void
that
without
as it may,
restraint was clearly the
he could not
waters from the
afford to
dragon
die.
pool.
The
The
human
Phoenix
race would
clan
be
had the
doomed if he
Phoenix
fell
nest,
here.
while the
Since he
Dragon
had no
Clan
means
had
to
to
advance
advance
to
to the
the
next realm within a
These were the
short time.
foundations of their
His only
respective
chance of victory
clans.
was to master
When the
Moo's
Phoenix
shadow
clan
technique.
mobilized the power
Just
of the
one or
Phoenix
two of
nest
him could
against
not
their
compete
enemies.
with Mo.
The Dragon
But what
clan
about
had
three
not
of him?
unleashed the power
Or
of the Dragon
5?
Pool. Or 10.
It was not that the Dragon Clan did not want to bring out their trump card, was young
but rather
Kai's
that they
only
lacked
chance
the
at
ability to
defeating
perform
MO.
such a feat under normal
Therefore,
circumstances.
he had mainly been buying time during his previous fight would have required very complicated rituals in addition to the concerted efforts of many Dragon Clan members. Mu had not been able to teach young Kai about the mystery behind the shadow technique. Could not afford the time and energy to perform such intricate rites on such a crisis-ridden battlefield. On the contrary,
that was the case until young Shao became a divine dragon.
With Fu Guang's cooperation, the two divine dragons joined hands and forcibly summoned the dragon pool to the battlefield
with his own abilities.
The dragon pool was the foundation of the Dragon Clan.
Young Kai had embarked on the
After
same
all,
path as
the
Mu.
existence of the dragon pool was the
she believed that
prerequisite for
he
the
would
Dragon
eventually
Clan
comprehend the
to produce
mysterious
endless
secret
descendants.
technique and
Not to
understand
mention,
her intentions
the
for
power
giving
of the
him
dragon
his
pool
space-time
was
river.
diligently
Having come
accumulated
into
over
contact with
countless
more than
generations of the Dragon
Clan,
clans.
regardless
Young Kai
of whether the
already
war
had
would
some
end
vague
in
ideas
victory or
about the
defeat
shadow
today.
technique before
The
he
Dragon
devoured
Clan
and
would
refined
inevitably
Mu's
suffer
space-time
unimaginable
river.
losses
Furthermore,
by summoning the dragon
Mu's
pool
final
on such a
gift had
chaotic
laid down a
battlefield.
solid foundation
It would
for
be
him.
impossible to
It was
restore
thanks
the
to
lost
the foundation
energy without
that he finally
several hundreds
understood
of
the
thousands
secrets
of
of the
years
shadow
of
technique
recuperation,
and was able to perform it
Nevertheless,
through his
there was
space-time
no
river.
denying that the
There was no
effects of
denying
summoning
that
the
Mo
dragon
had
pool
killed
were
him.
remarkable.
But the one who
The
died
waters
was a
of the
copy of
dragon
himself
pool
who had
turned into a
existed at a
raging
certain
torrent
time in the
that swept
past.
out in all directions.
Nonetheless,
And
the
the demise
demise
of
of
a
a
shadow
soldier
was
was
not
not
within
without
this flood
cost.
instantly perished.
Although it was young
the
Kai's
power of the
first time
dragon
performing
was
the
an
shadow
unstoppable
technique.
force.
He quickly
If a
noticed that
dragon
something
bearing
was
the
wrong.
Dragon Clan bloodline
He
came
raised
into
a hand to
contact
his
with
head
the Dragon
in
Pool's
confusion.
waters.
It feels
They
like
would
I've
be able to
forgotten
enhance
something.
their bloodline
He
and
had
increase their
completely lost
strength.
his memories of the
On the
time during
contrary,
which the
the
deceased
waters
shadow
of the
him had
dragon pool
existed.
were a lethal
Never
poison to
mind.
living creatures without
It
the
probably
power of a
wasn't
dragon
anything
vein in their
important.
bodies. Everywhere the mighty current flowed, death followed.
He gave a
Even one of
carefree
the
laugh
royal
and
lords
looked up at
rushing
Mo.
towards the two divine
Shall
dragons,
we go for round two?
who accidentally
Mo's
got caught in the
lips
current,
curled
only
upwards.
managed to struggle
His
for a few
expression
breaths
had been
before he
sullen
dissolved
throughout
into
the battle with young
rampaging
Kai,
waters.
as
It
though
was
he
a
owed
grand
him a
display
massive
of the
debt.
terrifying power
He also
within the
repeatedly
mighty
made
current of the
rude and
dragon
disparaging
pool.
remarks.
Needless to
But
say,
he broke into a
the
smile
current
at
did
this
not
moment.
pose any threat to beings like
Interesting.
the royal lords and the territory
interesting
lords as
part
long
has
as they
yet to
remained
come.
on guard. As soon as the words left young
The
Kai's
power
mouth,
emanating from the
doubt
dragon pool
strengths
might be
lingering
impressive,
around his body
but
began to
powerful
fluctuate.
masters
only needed
He
to avoid
arrived
the
in front
waters
of
by a
Mo
certain
in the
margin
blink of
to
an eye.
remain unaffected.
The space-time
However,
river surged
it was
behind
never
him.
Fu Guang's
Raising
intention
his
to
arm,
target the enemy
young Kai
masters
summoned
when he
the
joined
Azure
forces
Dragon
with
Spear
young
and
Shao to
thrust it
summon
at
the
Mo.
dragon pool. The Azure
His
Dragon
goal had
Spear
always
should have
been
been
the
the Black
destroyed,
Ink Clan
but
army.
the Azure Dragon
The
Spear
royal
in the
lords and the
space-time that
territory
young
lords
Kai's
could
shadow
easily dodge the
originated
raging
and remained
currents,
intact.
but the Black Ink
That
Clan
was why the
soldiers
shattered
weaker than the
spear could
territory lords
display
were
its
not so
great
capable.
strength once more.
Therefore,
As
the troops
before,
of the Black
the
Ink Clan
violent
army were now
fallout
produced
produced
by their
droves.
exchange of blows.
Some small
Continuously
stone
spread
race
to the
members
surroundings.
fighting the Black Ink
The
Clan army were
spectating
also
Ninth
caught
Order
in the
masters
raging
couldn't
torrent,
help widening
but this
their
couldn't
eyes
be
at the
helped.
sight.
Although
They
Fu
secretly
Guang had
rejoiced
done his
that
best to
young
summon the
Kai
dragon
had
pool in an
resurrected in
area where
time.
only the Black
With
Ink
their
Clan
strength,
was heavily
Mo
concentrated,
would have
he
effortlessly
could not
killed them
exert
if they
fine
had rushed
control over the
forward at the
direction in
time.
which the mighty
It was
current of the
initially
dragon pool
assumed
would
that
flow.
young Kai would be able to
Hence,
persist for a long
accidental
time,
injuries
even
among
though the
friendly
battle was
troops
not
was
evenly
inevitable.
matched in strength.
What shocked him, though, was that
After
the
all,
small stone
he had
race
displayed
members
his
caught in
immense
the raging
strength
torrent of the
previously.
dragon pool did not lose their lives.
The battle only
On the
lasted
contrary,
for 4 hours
they
before
simply
Mo
struggled
found
in
an
the current
opening
for
for some
slammed
time
his
before
fist
they
into
quickly
young
rushed
Kai's
out and
chest.
resumed
A
fighting.
gaping hole
After
appeared in
pondering
young
on it for a
Kai's
moment,
chest.
though, then his
Fu
body
Guang
exploded
realized
into
what had
pieces.
happened.
His
These
aura
small
also
stone race
swiftly
soldiers
dwindled
might be
away into
simple-minded,
nothing.
but their
Despite
bodies
knowing
contained a
that he would not
significant amount of
experience a
power
true
from the
death,
burning light
the
and
Ninth
serene
Order
glimmer.
masters could not
Even
help
if the
being
power of the
overwhelmed
dragon
by
pool was
sorrow
both
at the
ancient
sight.
and pure,
After
it was still
eradicating young
incomparable to the
Kai's
original
second shadow,
powers of Yin and Yang
Mo
born
raised his
alongside
eyes
the
to look in the
universe.
direction of
The
the space-time
realization
river.
completely relieved
He had lived
Fu
with
Guang
Mu
of
for
such
such
a
a
long
long
time.
With hindsight,
So he was well aware of the
he
shadow
had to admit
technique
that
strength.
summoning the dragon
The
pool
true
at such a
strength of the
perilous
secret
juncture
technique
had been
was
a
not
stroke
power,
of genius.
but the prominent
Following the
ability
raging
to
torrent
survive
that was
swept
granted
out
to
in
the
all
users
directions.
of the secret
The
technique.
Black Ink Clan
The
army
shadow
suffered
technique
enormous
was created
losses,
based on the space-time
completely
river.
eliminating the
So the
numerical
foundation of the
advantage
secret
they originally
technique was the
held.
space-time river
On the
itself.
other hand,
The human
in order
race
to
army was
completely
small in
eradicate
number
an
and user of the
extremely
shadow
agile in their
technique.
movements.
The space-time river
Hence,
must first
it
be
was not
destroyed.
difficult for them to avoid the mighty
Otherwise,
current under
the user of the shadow
command.
technique would never perish.
As
for the small stone
For
race.
that reason,
Only their
immediately
formations were
aimed for the
scattered by the
space-time
impact,
river as
while
soon
they
as
did
he
not suffer
suffered
any
Yonkai's
actual
second shadow.
casualties.
Black
After a
ink
while,
strength around
the
his body
dragon
surged
pool
to cover
vanished
the
without a
entire
trace.
river.
He
The
planned
release
to
of the
corrupt
waters
the
that the
entire
dragon pool
space-time
had
river
accumulated
with
over
black ink
countless
strength in order
eons
to destroy
instantly changed the
Yonkai's
entire
shadow
situation
technique.
on the battlefield.
But before Mo
It
could
was
make a
finally
move,
time for a
another
counterattack
of
of the
Yonkai's
allied
shadow
army of the
jumped
human
out of
and
the
the small
space-time
stone
river.
races.
Among the remaining Black Ink Clan army, all the royal lords wore solemn expressions on their faces.
And launched himself at
They
Mo.
simply could not
He
understand
even
this
made a
sudden
mocking
turn of
remark.
events.
Why
How
are you
did
in
the
such a
Black Ink
hurry?
Clan,
The
who
two
should have had an
figures resumed
absolute
their
numerical
vicious battle
advantage,
once more.
end up in such
During
dire
that time,
condition all of a sudden?
Yonkai fought Mo while gathering various
Without
information
sufficient
on the
numerical
shadow
advantage.
technique.
It was
his
impossible
first
for the
time
Black Ink
performing the
Clan to be a
secret
match
technique,
for the allied army
so
of
his
the human race
understanding
in
of
the
it
small
was
stone
quite
race.
lacking. To make
He had
matters
to perfectly
worse,
master the
that
secret
terrifying
technique as
woman
soon
was
as
also
possible
beginning
because
to
that
take
was the
action
only way
again.
he could turn the
After the
situation
three
around
divine
and obtain
spirits
victory.
advanced to the ninth
If
order
he
in quick
only relied
succession,
on a
they
never-ending series
immediately
of
charged
battles
into the
via his
battlefield
shadows,
to resolve the
he
most
would never
critical
be able to
crises.
defeat Mo.
Zhang Ruo,
However,
she finally
Young
had the
Kai
chance
would
to
need to
catch
make
her breath
countless
as a
attempts
result.
and gain experience
She had
from
watched the
actual
entire
practice
chain
to
of events
perfectly master
unfolding
the
before
secret
her,
technique as soon
beginning
as
with the
possible.
dragon pool summoning,
I've forgotten
the
more
raging
things,
current sweeping
but
out
the
across the
memories I
battlefield,
deliberately
and
preserved have
finally,
not been
the
forgotten.
Black Ink Clan
That's
soldiers
good
being
news.
washed away and vanishing
Young
from
Kai
existence.
quietly muttered to himself
Tightening
and
her grip
resumed
around the
battle
heaven's
against
order
Mo.
sword, she murmured
Although he
under
was
her
no
breath,
match for Mo
"Seniors,
still,
I'm
he
heading
no
into
longer
battle."
needed to worry about death.
Big Brother Huang
That
sighed
was why he
softly,
could afford
like he
to
wanted
act
to make
more
a comment.
recklessly than before.
But in the end,
He
shortly
said nothing
afterwards,
and silently
Young
cooperated
Kai
with
gained
Big
another
Sister Lan
important
to help
piece
of
of information.
information. She maintained the balance
shorter
of power
the span
in her
of
body.
space-time allocated,
The Heaven's Order
the weaker
bloodline
the
burned
shadow's
one's fighting
more,
ability.
and the wings
That
behind
is
Zhang
certainly
Ruo's
worth
back
noting.
glowed with a blue and
When
yellow
that thought
hue.
passed through his
She
mind,
charged into the
the
battlefield
strength
without
of his shadow
hesitation,
faltered, aiming
Young
directly
Kai
at the
showed
royal
weaknesses
lords
in
in his
his
defenses.
defenses, and our
So
heir.
Mo instantly
At this
found
moment,
an opening
the
and
pressure
slaughtered
faced
him.
by the Allied
Blood
army on the
rained
main
all over the
battlefield was
void.
not that serious.
Despite witnessing similar
In fact,
scenes on
they were
several
beginning
occasions
to gain
already,
the upper hand.
the Ninth
That
Order
was why
masters
Zhang
watching the
Ruo,
battle
she
from
did not
afar
head
still
for the
widened
main
their eyes at
battlefield.
the sight.
She would not
What
last much
reassured them
longer
was
in
that the
battle.
next Young
So there
Kai
was
had
no
already
point in
leapt out of the
slaughtering some
space-time river
miscellaneous
almost
Black
as
Ink
soon as
Clan
the
troops
previous
with what
Young
little
Kai
time
died.
she had left.
It was undoubtedly more cost-efficient to spend her limited strength slaughtering some royal lords instead. Besides,
Marshal Peak,
Ade and our heir
Chapter
would be freed as long as she killed
5998.
enough royal lords.
Contribution from the
Allied
future.
army of the
One
human
after
race and the
another,
small stone race
Young
would
Kai's
also
shadows
receive the
stepped
support
out
of
from
the
the
two
space-time
giant
river
spirit
only
gods
to
if she
perish at
succeeded,
Mo's hands.
which might be
There
more
were no
effective than providing
exceptions.
support by herself.
The first one had
In a
survived
flash
the
of
battle
yellow
for
and
over
blue,
4 hours.
Zhang Ruo,
She
she
entered
entered
the
the
range
range
of the battle
for
where
less than
Ade
4
and our
hours.
heir were located.
As for the third,
At this moment,
the
royal
royal
lords
lords
besieging
besieging
the
faster.
two giant spirit
This is
gods were
bad.
forced to suffer in
Among
silence.
those who were watching the
The
battle
royal
from a
lords
distance,
besieging Zhang
Mi
Ruo, she had been completely eradicated,
solemn,
and the
he had
numerical
noticed the
advantage of
issue
the
at
Black
hand.
Ink Clan army
It
on
was
the
an
main
extremely
battlefield
serious
was quickly being
issue.
overturned.
Although Young
At this
Kai's
point,
shadows were
the
endless
human
in
race
supply,
army had gained the
his
upper
strength
hand in
seemed
this
to be
battle.
weakening over time.
Even if the royal
It
lords
was as
fighting
though
the
time
two
was
giant
flowing
spirit
backwards
gods
for him,
wanted to help their
causing
comrades.
his condition
They
to
did
return
not
to an
dare to
earlier
leave their
period
positions
with each
easily.
shadow. They were
At this
only able
moment,
to keep the
Young
two
Kai's
giant
aura
spirit
was only
gods in
comparable
check
to a
by
newly
relying on
advanced Ninth
sufficient
Order
numbers
master.
to harass them.
Hence,
If any
he
of
was
them stepped
effortlessly
away from their
slaughtered by
position,
Mo as soon as
there
he
was a
stepped
risk
out
that
from
the
the
delicate
space-time
balance
river.
would be broken.
If the situation continued in this manner,
Once the two
he would
giant
not
spirit
even be
gods
able to
broke
maintain
free of their
his
restraints,
cultivation in the Ninth
it would be
Order.
impossible to
If
pin
that
them
were
down
to
again.
happen,
However,
Mo would be able
it
to
was
exterminate
evident that
him
Zhang
without even
Ruo
breaking
was
a
coming
sweat.
to help the two
No
giant
matter how many
spirit
shadows
gods.
were to appear,
The royal lords would
another
only
one
be
of
waiting
Young
for their
Kai's
imminent
shadows
deaths
in
if
the
they
newly
continued to
advanced
confront
Ninth
the two
Order
giant
stepped out
spirit
from the
gods.
space-time river.
But showing their backs
Raising
to
a
these three
hand,
terrifying
Mo
enemies
captured
would
the shadow
likely
in
just
its grasp
result in
and
them
stared
dying
at Young
faster.
Kai faintly.
At this point,
"You're a
they
disgrace
were
to
stuck in a
Mu's legacy."
situation with no hope of
Young
escape.
Kai did not
Any
panic,
choice
even
they
though
made
he
would
was
result in
captured
a
by
tragic
Mo.
end.
After the
Thus,
repeated
every
deaths
one
of
of
his
them felt
shadows,
aggrieved and
he was now
hopeless.
very familiar with the feeling of death. Raising an eyebrow at those words, he denied the statement. "That might not be true." Mo looked surprised. "Do you have another trick up your sleeve?" Young Kai grinned. "Indeed, a trick you've never seen before." "Very good." Mo made a faint smile. While saying so, he exerted some strength into his grip and crushed the shadow in his grasp. In the next moment, another Young Kai leapt out from the space-time river. However, the aura lingering around him was different this time. Something had obviously changed as his aura was once again at the peak of his strength. If the foundation of the shadow technique was said to be the space-time river, then the core of the secret technique was the user of the selected space-time. In Yang Kai's case, he was manipulating the 10,000 Dao strengths with his self from the space-time as the core and his space-time river as the foundation. That was how he gained the ability to summon shadows from previous space-time periods. All those who were slaughtered by Mo previously were his shadows. However, the one who walked out of the space-time river now was his main body. It was the him of the current space-time. The foundation and core were extremely important to the shadow technique. Therefore, it was necessary to destroy both aspects to overcome it. Mo had initially wanted to refine the space-time river but was hindered by Yang Kai's numerous shadows, which prevented it from taking action. However, he saw a ray of hope when Yang Kai's main body emerged from the space-time river. The shadow technique would be destroyed as long as the Yang Kai standing before him was eliminated. But, could it be that simple? for Yongkai's main body to emerge from the space-time river at this point. His actions certainly seemed like a desperate move. After all, the shadows that he summoned earlier had been cleanly eradicated. If he summoned any more shadows from earlier space-time periods, he would only have the cultivation of an 8th Order Master, which would not be able to cause any trouble for Mo at all. Combining the situation with what Yang Kai mentioned just now, Mo had the vague feeling that Yang Kai was about to reveal his trump card. Oddly enough, he found himself looking forward to what was to come for some reason. Yang Kai did not disappoint. When his main body stepped out of the space-time river, he lightly chanted, "I offer 1,000 years of my past in exchange for a contribution from the future. Come." As soon as those words left his mouth, the space-time river behind him began to rumble turbulently. The enormous river abruptly shrunk by a large margin. Then another of Yang Kai's shadow emerged from within the waters. Seeing this, Mo's eyes narrowed slightly. That was because the aura lingering around this shadow was slightly stronger than Yang Kai himself. That should have been impossible. It had to be said that the shadow technique was performed with one's self in the current spacetime as the core. For that reason, the summoned shadow could only be formed from one's self that existed in previous spacetimes. In other words, the summoned shadow should never be stronger than the main body, because the main body was ultimately the strongest. Be that as it may, an exception had appeared in Yang Kai's case. Mo instantly figured out the truth behind the situation and exclaimed in astonishment, "You summoned a shadow from the future?" Only Yang Kai from the future could be stronger than the main body of Yang Kai, who existed in the current spacetime. Mo did not remain idle when he raised this question. After realizing that Yang Kai's attainments in the shadow technique had surpassed Mu's, he knew that Yang Kai could not be allowed to continue, so he charged forward even while asking this question. In response, Yang Kai just stood calmly in place. On the other hand, the summoned shadow stepped forward and immediately engaged in an intense battle with Mo. Although he came from 1,000 years in the future, his strength was still limited even though he was slightly stronger than the main body. He was no match for Mo either, but he would have no trouble buying some time for Yang Kai. Furthermore, Yang Kai did not need much time. He then shouted again, "Come!" A second shadow stepped out from the space-time river. It was another Yang Kai who came from another 1,000 years into the future. When the second shadow appeared, the size of the space-time river shrunk again. On the other hand, the aura of Yang Kai and the two shadows instantly became closely interconnected. A three fortunes formation was established. The aura of the second shadow was again stronger than the first. The first shadow had been steadily pushed back by Mo's intense assault, but his situation improved as soon as the three fortunes formation was established, even though he remained at a disadvantage. Again! Yang Kai shouted. The dragon blood in his body boiled and churned, while at the same time, his face began to flush red. A third shadow stepped out from the space-time river. Glancing at the main body, he nodded lightly before he directly charged onto the battlefield. The three fortunes formation also instantly transformed into the four symbols formation. Again! Golden blood trickled out of Yang Kai's nose as a fourth shadow emerged and the four symbols formation evolved into a five elements formation. Shadow after shadow emerged from the space-time river without pause. Only when the eighth shadow was summoned did Yang Kai finally stop. It was not that he no longer wanted to continue, but rather that the volume of his space-time river would shrink by a certain extent whenever he summoned a shadow from the future, and the space-time river had vanished completely after he summoned the eighth shadow. He had reached the absolute limit of his shadow technique. At this moment, Yang Kai's main body was bleeding from all 7 of his orifices. It was evident that he had endured tremendous pressure in order to pull this feat off. The shadows that appeared towards the end possessed increasingly powerful auras. When the 6th shadow emerged, its aura had already reached the absolute peak of the 9th order. It was a stage that even Yang Kai's main body had not achieved. The 7th and the 8th shadows also had auras at the peak of the 9th order, but their auras had become even more profound. Looking at Mo, who was being besieged and steadily repelled by the shadows on the battlefield, Yang Kai smiled even though he was covered in blood. In truth, the shadows were already capable of fighting Mo on an equal footing when the 6 paths formation was formed. Therefore, Mo's situation then became more and more critical when it later evolved to become the 7 stars, 8 trigrams, and ultimately 9 palaces formation. The ones who established the battle formation were all Yang Kais. To be more precise, they were Yang Kais from future spacetimes. This was a feat that even Mu could not achieve. Her shadow technique could only summon shadows of her past because her space-time river was incomplete, but that was not the case for Yang Kai. His space-time river had been perfected, so the power of the shadow technique he wielded was even more terrifying. Martial Peak.
Chapter 5999. Clash of the Strongest. Each shadow represented a Xueqi from subsequent 1,000-year periods in the future. In other words, the 8 shadows represented 8,000 years worth of future spacetime. These 8 shadows combined with Xueqi's main body to establish the 9 palaces formation. For that reason, the power of the battle formation was even greater than the 9 palaces formation formed between Xueqi and her 8 personal guard. Xueqi, who had harmonized the power of yin and yang with her Heaven's Order bloodline, was certainly stronger than any of Xueqi's individual shadows. Be that as it may, the strength of the 8 personal guards had held her back. Taking the overall situation into account, Xueqi's 9 palaces formation was undoubtedly the strongest 9 palaces formations that had appeared on the battlefield. Moreover, the difference in strength was significant. After establishing the 9 palaces formation, Xueqi's main body took a step forward and charged towards Mo with the combined strength of the other 8 shadows. The 6 paths formation was already sufficient for Xueqi to fight Mo on even terms. So the 7 stars formation and 8 trigrams formations had left Mo at a complete disadvantage. At this moment, Xueqi was practically invincible thanks to the 9 palaces formation. With the combined forces of the main body and 8 shadows, Mo was powerless against their intense assault. Black blood and black ink strength splattered everywhere. The 9 Xueqis moved around swiftly, each one of them having mastered the 10,000 grand daras. As they were shadows of Xueqi himself, there was no need for them to worry about their cooperation. The connection between the shadows was so close and firm that there were no flaws in their movements at all. Mo naturally wanted to break free, but it was not easy to escape the besiegement of the battle formation. The 9th Order Masters watching the battle from afar were stunned. Nobody could have imagined that such a strange scene would appear during the final battle. The mysteries of the shadow technique had exceeded their comprehension and imagination. Looking at the current situation, they couldn't help feeling hopeful and excited. That was because they finally saw a glimpse of hope in defeating Mo. In the past, the issue of defeating Mo had always been a plague to the human race. Although they never deliberately avoided the topic, the reality was that they simply did not have sufficient means or strength to oppose Mo. Xueqi's support had certainly been a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, even she was not strong enough to compete with Mo in battle. The battle on the main battlefield was over, and the entire Black Ink clan had been obliterated. If Xueqi could defeat Mo, then the Black Ink crisis that had been plaguing the human race since the late ancient era would be resolved in one fell swoop. A bright future was awaiting the human race. The light would eventually expunge all darkness. However, the veteran 9th Order Masters soon began to look worried. The current situation might be favorable for them, but nobody knew what price Xueqi had paid to wield the shadow technique like this. Seeing as the secret technique far exceeded his own abilities, the price he paid would correspond to the strength he obtained. In other words, the greater the strength Xueqi obtained, the greater the price he had to pay. Furthermore, they did not know how long he could persevere in such an intense battle. The truth was just as they feared. Xueqi had indeed paid an unimaginable price to wield the shadow technique in such a fashion. His body was also forced to bear the incredible pressure that came from obtaining strength that exceeded his own abilities. In other words, he could not maintain this state for long. He had to finish this battle as soon as possible, and for that reason, he did not hesitate to join the battle himself just to defeat Mo a little faster. Mo was steadily being pushed back under the suppression of the 9 palaces formation. At this point, he was backed into a corner with no ability to fight back. The vexing situation infuriated Mo. As the ancient supreme being, he was a master who not only originated from the same era as Mu, but also once held the opportunity to reign over the entire universe. Even if more than 30% of his source had been suppressed and sealed, he could still not tolerate a junior acting so presumptuously in front of him, especially when this particular junior had stolen Mu's final legacy from him. Amid the intense battle, Mo abruptly turned to look in a certain direction and fixed his gaze on one of Xueqi's figures. Naturally, it was Xueqi's main body. The main body was easy to identify. Not only was the aura of the main body the weakest among the other shadows, but the appearance of the main body was also the most disheveled and worse for wear due to the effects of performing the shadow technique. To break the shadow technique, it was necessary to either destroy the space-time river that acted as the foundation or the main body that acted as the core. At this moment, the space-time river was nowhere to be seen because it had been evenly divided between Xueqi's 8 shadows. In that case, Mo only had one option left.
Mo turned to face the storm of attacks coming from so many shadows and disregarded the injuries he sustained, even when the strongest shadow chopped off his arm. In the end, the heavy price he paid was worthwhile indeed. He successfully broke out of the encirclement created by the shadows and arrived in front of Yang Kai's main body. Black ink strength surged. Raising his remaining hand, Mo blasted his fist at Yang Kai. The punch was quite a distance away from Yang Kai. Nevertheless, the force of the punch was enough to cause space to shatter, time to stop, and the universe to collapse. The blow containing Mo's full strength could not be dodged or avoided. Mo could almost see Yang Kai's main body being smashed into paste, and a hint of triumph flashed through the fury in his eyes, but unexpectedly, the imagined scene did not appear. Despite the incoming blow, Yang Kai's main body did not show the slightest trace of panic. On the contrary, he stepped forward and threw himself in the direction of the blow. Mo was stunned by the strange turn of events. Meanwhile, Yang Kai's main body suddenly unleashed a burst of power that far exceeded his own strength. The force directly penetrated the shackles of space and caused the stagnant time to flow again. Then he punched out at the same time. Damn it! Mo abruptly realized that he had fallen into a trap. For a long time now, the core of the Nine Palaces formation had always been sustained by the strongest shadow. Nevertheless, the fact that Yang Kai's main body could exert such a powerful burst of strength indicated that the core of the Nine Palaces formation could be transferred to the main body. The method to break the shadow technique was to defeat the body which existed in the current spacetime. That was something both Mo and Yang Kai knew. Seeing as the former was bound to target the main body, how could the latter not take precautions? It could even be said that Yang Kai had been waiting for this very moment. A violent force swept out, pushing Mo's figure backwards. In the meantime, the 8 shadows attacked from all directions. Dao's strengths fluctuated wildly, and the barrage of attacks left Mo staggering from the impact. If that were all, Mo's situation would have been bad enough. However, each of the 8 shadows actually exerted strength that far exceeded their limits with every blow that they unleashed. The position as core of the formation was constantly being transferred around. To be precise, the position as core was instantly transferred to whichever shadow was attacking Mo at the time. Such a feat would have been impossible to achieve if it was any other configuration for the makeup of the battle formation. But Yang Kai could freely transfer the position as core between his main body and his shadows without any obstruction. This was the same strategy that Zhang Ruoshi had carried out previously. She and her 8 personal guard had both been the cores and not the cores at the same time. Such a perfect 9 palaces formation could be said to have no flaws whatsoever. More importantly, there was no need to fear the weak links being targeted. In fact, there was only one method to destroy this battle formation, which was to totally annihilate it by brute force. The biggest reason why Zhang Ruoshi had been defeated by Mo was that her personal guard could not withstand the intensity and ferocity of the battle. Transferring the core position to her personal guard was a huge burden on their bodies. Each time they became the core, they would also suffer heavy damage from the pressure. Hence, there was a risk of their bodies collapsing after numerous transfers. The same was also true for Yang Kai. In fact, the burden was greatest on his main body. The main body had already been greatly weakened after performing the shadow technique. With the addition of the pressure from being the core of the formation, he couldn't help vigorously coughing up blood, his complexion turning as pale as a sheet. Be that as it may, he did not hesitate in the slightest. Taking full advantage of the opening created by the 8 shadows who were besieging Mo, Yang Kai stepped forward and approached Mo's arm that had been severed earlier. Although the arm was bleeding profusely, it was not a fully physical body part. Open! Yang Kai raised his arm and pointed at the arm. His divine sense surged turbulently. A moment later, a huge set of doors suddenly appeared in front of him. The door opened slightly to reveal a small gap, and then an indescribable pulling force seeped out from within and devoured the entire severed arm. This arm contained part of Mo's source. Previously, some 30% of Mo's source had been suppressed and sealed by Yang Kai with the help of the profound source gate. If Yang Kai could not suppress and seal this piece of Mo's source quickly, the opportunity to retrieve his severed arm and reabsorb the piece of his source he had lost would remain. Once Mo did so, he would return to full strength again. Now that this piece of his source had been sealed, Mo's aura dropped significantly. Although black ink strength surged at the spot where his arm had been severed and formed a new limb in the blink of an eye, the power that had been suppressed and sealed could no longer return. With the success of this attack, Yang Kai's confidence increased tremendously. This was the first crucial step towards victory. It was also the hardest and most dangerous step in the entire process. This step had paved the way for the rest of the path, making what came next easier. Retrieving the profound source gate, Yang Kai turned around and charged towards Mo. The furious battle resumed once more. The secret that the position as core of the Nine Palaces formation could be freely transferred between the shadows had already been exposed. Therefore, Yang Kai had no reason to hide his movements anymore. Dao's strengths fluctuated violently around him, and his offensive grew increasingly vicious. Mo was already no match for Yang Kai when the Nine Palaces formation was formed, so now that he had lost a part of his source, his situation worsened even more. After a brief but intense battle, one of Yang Kai's shadows found an opening and chopped off one of Mo's arms again. Mo immediately attempted to retrieve his severed arm, but Yang Kai was already prepared for such an opportunity in advance. In the end, Mo was incapable of extricating himself from the battle due to the constant assault by the various shadows. Yang Kai's main body swiftly approached the severed arm, and for the second time, he summoned the profound source gate and devoured the source piece. After completing his task, Yang Kai coughed up another mouthful of blood. He raised his head and glanced at the battlefield. Perceiving the condition of his shadows, he knew that he could not persist for much longer. His main body was not the only one who was severely wounded by now. The rest of the shadows were also in a similar condition. However, only a small portion of these wounds were caused by Mo. Most of them had come from carrying the burden of being the Nine Palaces formation core. Yang Kai's immense strength and heritage had allowed him to bear an unimaginable amount of pressure from being the core. That was only possible because it was him. If it were any other Ninth Order Master instead, they would not have been able to withstand the pressure after being a core 3 times in such a situation, regardless of their strength. I have to end this as quickly as possible. Yang Kai muttered under his breath. Then he stepped forward and joined the battlefield. In the next moment, his strongest shadow took on the boundless pressure from being the core and unleashed a continuous storm of attacks without care whether his body could withstand the burden or not. Mo clearly faltered under the violent bombardment of the strongest shadow. While Mo was busy stewing in rage, the strongest shadow threw himself forward and disregarded Mo's counterattack to restrain Mo firmly. At such a close distance, he grinned at Mo and revealed a sinister row of fangs. Mo immediately understood Yang Kai's intentions. Roaring furiously, he desperately struggled to escape. However, the attacks that came blasting from all directions rained down on Mo and the shadow the next moment. Even the strongest shadow could not withstand this barrage of attacks. Thus, he exploded and disintegrated completely. Likewise, Mo's body was battered from the attack. The left part of his body was gone, revealing the internal organs within his abdomen cavity. Mo staggered backwards weakly, a strange light flashing through his eyes for a moment. Before he could do anything though, another shadow charged towards him. Martial Peak. Chapter 6000. Many thanks. The strongest shadow had already been shattered, and with that, the Nine Palaces formation had also been reduced to the 8 trigrams formation, which significantly reduced its might. At the same time, Mo's aura was not as strong as before. After 2 pieces of his source were sealed by Yang Kai, his aura had been notably weakened. As the remaining 7 shadows attacked Mo, Yang Kai's main body summoned the profound source gate for a 3rd time, suppressing and sealing another piece of Mo's shattered body. Mo's aura weakened once again. The 8 trigrams formation was now sufficient to deal with the current Mo. A series of fearsome attacks struck back the battle formation, destroying another of Yang Kai's shadows. In exchange, Mo once again suffered heavy injuries. The 8 trigrams formation had been reduced to the 7 stars formation. Previously, Yang Kai's shadows had emerged from the space-time river one after another, joining the battle formation and making it stronger, but the situation had reversed now. As more of these shadows perished, the might of the battle formation also began to weaken. The only benefit was that Mo also weakened. Each time a shadow perished, Mo's body would shatter and Yang Kai's main body would seize the opportunity to suppress and seal another piece of the former source. In the end, all of the shadows disappeared, leaving Yang Kai bleeding all over, staring right across at a miserable and weakened Mo. The current Mo had a large amount of his source suppressed and sealed, which significantly decreased his strength. He was no longer as mighty as before, And even the rich and dense black ink strength lingering around him was now extremely faint, almost invisible. The current MO had lost more than 90% of his source. In other words, he only had 10% of his peak strength, which was far from prime condition. Right then, several figures flew over and formed a circle, surrounding the battlefield. They were the human race masters who had been watching from afar, as well as the giant spiritual gods Ade and Aer. Previously, it was impossible for them to intervene in the battle. Even the two giant spiritual gods were unable to approach, let alone the Ninth Order masters. However, as Mo's strength suffered with the destruction of Yongkai's shadows again and again, the spectating masters finally had a chance to be useful. Mo had lost. It was simply impossible for him to deal with so many masters with his current strength. Just the two giant spiritual gods alone were enough to overpower him now. Nonetheless, Mo was laughing, his voice sounding extremely cheerful. Zhang Ruoxi stood before Yongkai with the Heaven's Order sword in her hand, vigilantly staring at Mo. Although Mo was in a miserable state right now, no one knew what kind of methods this ancient being still had hidden up his sleeve. As such, they still had to take necessary precautions. Yongkai. Mo's smile faded as it shouted at Yongkai. Let's settle this. Behind Zhang Ruoxi, Yongkai calmed his roiling vitality and replied, Good. Sir. Zhang Ruoxi shouted. Allow me. She still had the strength to launch one last attack and was confident that she could take down Mo with it. So, she naturally wouldn't let Yongkai take the risk. No. There's no need. Yongkai stepped forward and walked past Zhang Ruoxi, staring at the nearby Mo. Even as victory was within his grasp, there was no trace of the pride or arrogance on Yongkai's face as a victor should have. Rather, there was only a complicated expression. None of you is to interfere. Yongkai gently ordered. The gathered masters furrowed their brows ever so slightly. In the current situation, the best course of action was undoubtedly to attack together and take down Mo in an instant, ending this disaster that had lasted for millions of years once and for all. However, Yongkai actually told them not to interfere. No one knew what Yongkai was thinking or up to. However, out of their trust in Yongkai, everyone still acquiesced to his demand. Be that as it may, they still maintained their encirclement and focused their auras. If anything happened to Yongkai, Mo would immediately be attacked from all directions. When dealing with Mo, there was no need to discuss honor or morals. Despite being surrounded on all sides, Mo's expression still remained calm. He simply stared at Yongkai and shouted, Come! As soon as he spoke, his figure rushed straight towards Yongkai, leaving a streak of black light behind him. Simultaneously, Yongkai also charged towards Mo. The moment the two figures collided, everyone's hearts jumped to their throats. However, the next thing that entered their sight left them relieved. Yongkai's fist had smashed into Mo's chest, while Mo's fist had stopped right before Yongkai's head. Pooh! Mo spurted a mouthful of black blood as his raised fist limply fell. Standing at arm's length from one another, when their eyes suddenly met, Mo smiled at Yongkai. Many thanks. Yongkai nodded to him, and thought for a moment before adding, I will let you see the world Mu wished for you to see. Despite the jet-black blood flowing from the corners of Mo's mouth, a free and relieved expression appeared on his face after hearing this. Then, that's enough. Yongkai didn't say anything more and summoned the profound source gate. As the gate cracked open, it swallowed Mo whole. Right afterwards, the door slowly closed itself, sealing the endless darkness behind it. Back then, it was Mu who had rescued Mo from behind this door, and after more than 1,000,000 years, Yongkai had sent him back through it. This ancient being had lived his life. He did not dare say he didn't have any regrets, but at the very least, his life had certainly been quite an exciting one. Pooh! Yongkai spurted a mouthful of blood before sitting down cross-legged, taking out a handful of pills from his space ring and stuffing them into his mouth. Everyone immediately rushed to him upon seeing this. Su Yan flew straight behind Yongkai and sat down, allowing him to lean on her. After a while, Yongkai's chaotic aura finally started to stabilize. As he opened his eyes, he saw many pairs of eyes gazing at him with worried looks. I won't die, Yongkai comforted everyone, allowing them to relax. Mi Jingluan finally couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked, Why did you thank Mo at the last moment? Although no one heard Yongkai's words of thanks, they could tell what he was saying by reading Yongkai's lips. Yongkai heaved a sigh explaining, From beginning to end, Mo never went all out. What? Ouyang Lai was shocked. He didn't go all out? How is that possible? The others also had a look of incredulity on their faces. To their surprise, their battle almost ended in mutual destruction even when Yang Kai had given it everything he had. Did that mean Mo would have obtained the final victory if he had not held back? Yang Kai continued, "It's not that Mo didn't use his full strength, but rather that he didn't resort to any of his other tricks." Yang Kai had always been on guard against certain methods. The royal lords had their royal lord secret technique, which could instantly corrupt Eighth Order masters. As the Black Ink Clan's creator, how could Mo not have similar methods? What's more, such a method when used by Mo would surely be far more profound than what a royal lord could produce. Of course, Yang Kai had the soul-warming lotus protecting his soul, and the world tree clone protecting his small universe. But even so, he could not say with absolute certainty that they would be able to defend against such a move. Song once mentioned that a mere clone could not completely negate Mo's black ink strength. Only the world tree itself would be capable of that. So when Yang Kai fought with Mo, he had always been on guard. But from beginning to end, Mo had not used that mysterious method. Was it that Mo couldn't? Impossible. He just didn't want to. Even after Yang Kai summoned his 8 shadows, Mo still held a trump card that could have instantly turned the tables. Furthermore, he never needed to fight Yang Kai head-on. He could have just stalled for time, and the 8 shadows from the future spacetimes would slowly have dissipated. Not to mention, there was even a decent chance Mo could have broken away from the 9 Palaces formation's blockade and escaped. At the very least, it was clear Mo had no such intention. From beginning to end, he had fought with Yang Kai head-on. At first glance, it seemed like Mo wanted to kill Yang Kai, no matter the cost. But was that really the case? Therefore, although Mo had been fighting with all his strength against Yang Kai, he had not truly gone all out. Marshall Peak. Chapter 6001. Price. This was the reason why Yang Kai thanked Mo in the end. I'm afraid this is the end he wanted. Mu had protected the human race in the universe for countless years, and even after her death, she had left behind many contingencies and hidden hands. Although the world was in ruins and the human race were like ants to Mo, it was still what Mu wanted to protect. Under the premise that the world had someone else strong enough to protect it, Mo was willing to go along with Mu's will. Of course, if Yang Kai didn't have the necessary strength, Mo wouldn't mind killing him. In that case, Mo would have still set aside a great territory for the human race to live and multiply after he dominated the entire universe. This way, the human race wouldn't be wiped out and he would have a reasonable explanation for Mu. At the end of the day, Mo was not inherently evil. In the late ancient era, he had even protected the human race and took it upon himself to help them gain their freedom. If it weren't for him and the 10 martial ancestors working together, the human race of that era would not have been able to defeat the early ancient era's great monsters. It was just that he was unable to control his gradually growing power and eventually lost his way, especially after Mu's demise. When she died, no one was able to restrain him anymore. Today's ending was something Mo himself probably sought from the start. Everyone sunk into silence after listening to Yang Kai's explanation of what truly happened, as what Mu would want others to know. Their current feelings were tough to describe. Mo's life might have been filled with misery, but he was still the one who had brought about the pain and suffering of the human race for millions of years. Had there been no Mo, the human race would have ruled the world unchallenged after defeating the early ancient era's great monsters. There would not have been a war that lasted for so many eons. The Black Ink disaster had caused unimaginable losses to the human race, with countless elites having sacrificed their lives to bring it to an end. As far as the human race was concerned, no matter how miserable Mo's life had been, it was an irrefutable fact that he was the human race's greatest enemy. As the adage goes, the winner is the king, and the loser is the villain. Gotcha. Suddenly, it sounded as if something had cracked. Everyone promptly turned to look at the source, and was immediately shocked. Big brother. Yang Xueqi called out, staring at Yang Kai's face in horror. Everyone also looked serious as a crack appeared on Yang Kai's face. It was not a normal wound, and neither was Yang Kai bleeding from it. After the first crack, another one appeared soon after, and then another, and another. They were not just on Yang Kai's face, but on his hands as well. The current Yang Kai looked like a piece of porcelain that was on the verge of shattering, and everyone could feel fearsome Dao strength seeping from these cracks. Yong Kai looked down at his hands and muttered to himself, "It came faster than I expected." He seemed to have anticipated his current situation. "What's happening?" Su Yan asked from behind him, her tender body uncontrollably trembling. After so many years of struggle, Mo was finally defeated and the black ink disaster was resolved. The future belonged to the human race, and it was foreseeable that the world would become a far better place. Yong Kai was the biggest contributor in the final battle, but at this moment, his entire body was shrouded in an inexplicable crisis. Everyone could not help but be nervous. What was even more disturbing was that no one had ever seen such injuries before. Yong Kai gently patted the back of Su Yan's hand, comforting her, "I won't die, but I don't have much time left." "What does that mean?" Xiao Xiao asked. How should I put it? Everyone around him was worried to death, but Yong Kai, the main person involved, remained completely calm and composed. The shadow technique was created by Mu with the space-time river as its foundation. I inherited her legacy and walked the same path as her, so naturally I can also use the secret technique. However, Mu's space-time river was incomplete, so her shadow technique was actually incomplete. She could only summon shadows from the past, and once those shadows dispersed, the memories of that period would also disappear. On the other hand, I have perfected this secret technique and can summon shadows from the future. Each shadow I summoned in the battle just now was from 1,000 years in my future. Now that the shadows have already been destroyed, I must pay the price. The more powerful a secret technique was, the harder it was to use it. The shadow technique was undoubtedly the most powerful secret technique that had ever appeared in this world, especially since Yong Kai had surpassed his predecessor and used it to defeat Mo. The price he had to pay would definitely not be small either. Once the shadows of the past are destroyed, the memories of the corresponding past will also disappear. So, what kind of price do you have to pay when your future shadow is destroyed? Mi Jingluan asked solemnly. I won't exist in those periods in the future. You won't exist? What do you mean? Although I can't explain it clearly, you can think of it as a literal statement. Mi Jingluan was silent for a moment, digesting this unbelievable news. You summoned 8 shadows, so does that mean 8,000 years of your future just disappeared? Indeed. What happens after 8,000 years? Yong Kai shook his head. I have no idea. After all, this was the first time he had used the shadow technique, so although he knew that he would cease to exist for the next 8,000 years, all traces of his existence would be erased by the space-time Tao strength of the universe. He couldn't say for certain what would happen after that. How could this be? Yang Shui's eyes turned red. It's not a big problem. I should be able to return after 8,000 years, Yong Kai comforted. Despite his assurance, everyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. His back suddenly became lighter as Su Yan suddenly left. She returned soon after, but this time she brought Yu Ru Meng and the others with her. The eyes of all the women turned red as they tried to hold back their grief, preventing their tears from rolling down. Su Yan had already briefed everyone of the situation, so they knew the crisis Yong Kai was about to encounter. In the short time Su Yan was not there though, further cracks had appeared on Yong Kai and the leakage of Dao strengths had become more and more obvious. Yong Kai really didn't have much time left, and the backlash from the shadow technique was even stronger than he had imagined. Mi Jingluan shot a glance at the crowd, whereupon everyone apart from Yong Kai's close relatives retreated to the side. The women who had been brought here by Su Yan finally couldn't hold it in any further and burst into tears. In the end, it was Yu Ru Meng who acted like the big sister of the family and managed to compose herself first. Before she could say anything more though, the skin on Yong Kai's face began to peel off and disappear. Even though they were all 8th and 9th order masters now, there was nothing they could do. Everyone held back their grief as they helplessly watched Yong Kai's figure gradually vanish. At the very last moment, Yu Ru Meng shouted at Yong Kai. You heartless bastard! Mark my words, if you don't come back after 8,000 years, I'll take my sisters and marry someone else. Yong Kai gave her a smile. This sounds so familiar. Yu Ru Meng's will finally shattered, and she broke into tears. She tightly grabbed Yong Kai's hand and begged. You must come back. You must. Yong Kai swept his gaze over all of them one by one, as if he wanted to imprint their faces into the depths of his soul, before gently nodding and assuring, Of course. Right then, scattered specks of light emerged before an enormous river spanning across the void appeared. enveloping Yang Kai. Soon after, an enormous wave came crashing down on him, swallowing him into the river. The river slowly disappeared, and so did Yang Kai along with it, leaving behind a group of women standing there in a daze, their endless sorrow flowing like a river. "Something's not right," Mi Jingluan, who was watching from afar, suddenly whispered before turning to Xiang Shan. "Do you feel it?" Xiang Shan nodded his agreement. "There's something wrong." The other Ninth Order Masters more or less felt the same way. Although they couldn't figure out what exactly was wrong, Ninth Order Masters were extremely perceptive. Their senses were so sharp that even just a slight disparity around them would arouse their suspicion. Everyone made their respective probes, but none of them were able to find anything amiss. Unable to find anything wrong, they had no choice but to put this matter aside, but they still maintained a certain degree of vigilance. The curtain of the final battle had already fallen. The Allied army had finished off the Black Ink Clan army, while MO had been completely sealed by Yang Kai. Although the greatest contributor had suffered severe backlash from his secret technique and had his existence wiped out by space and time for the next 8,000 years, when all was said and done, the victory needed to be publicized. When Mi Jingluan and the others returned and spread the news that MO had been ended, the human race army of millions that had been waiting here all cheered and danced in joy. The war that had been going on for millions of years had finally come to an end. Now, all under the heavens belonged to the human race. After the battle, the casualties were counted and the aftermath was dealt with in an orderly manner. The small stone race army had already withdrawn and returned to the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The human race also began their withdrawal half a month later. The void corridor created by Zhang Ruoshi saved the human race a lot of time. Not everyone left, however, headed by Su Yan and Yu Rumeng, Yang Kai's wives, his disciples, Yang Shui, Yang Xiao, and several others all stayed behind. They remained in the place where Yang Kai had disappeared, quietly waiting for his return. The next 8,000 years would definitely be very dull and long, but so long as they could see Yang Kai the moment he returned, any amount of waiting would be worth it. A fleet of dilapidated warships entered the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The current Zhang Ruoshi could still somehow maintain the balance of yin and yang in her body, so the chaotic dead territory was now a safe place. Be that as it may, she couldn't maintain this state for much longer. In order to fight MO and kill the royal lords, she had burned too much of her Heaven's Order bloodline. Once the human race army left the chaotic dead territory, she would break the harmony with the two. At that time, Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan would reappear, and Zhang Ruoshi would lose her previous strength. At the end of the day, if she didn't have her Heaven's Order bloodline that could maintain the harmony of yin and yang, she would just be a Ninth Order master. The fleet passed through the chaotic dead territory and soon returned to the 3,000 worlds. Many years ago, when the human race army first set off from the star boundary, they had some 30 million soldiers, but now, only slightly more than 10 million remained. Around 60% of the soldiers had died in this final war. Despite the terrible losses, compared to the solemn and miserable atmosphere they had when they first set out, everyone was high in spirits, and every warship was buzzing with cheers and laughter, despite the sad state of the army. On a certain purifying black ink warship that was so wrecked that it looked like it would fall apart at any moment, Mi Jingluan was standing at the bow with Xiang Shan beside him. The two calmly listened to the hustle and bustle on the other warships and exchanged a knowing glance. The human race has won, but the greatest contributor is unable to celebrate with us. It's quite regretful, Mi Jingluan couldn't help but lament. Xiang Shan nodded his agreement. Now that I think about it, had he not forced those peace treaties with the Black Ink Clan, the human race wouldn't have been able to accumulate enough strength. That's right, Mi Jingluan nodded. By the looks of it, that treaty was an important turning point in the rise of the human race. What was that treaty called? What's it called again? The two Ninth Order Masters glanced at each other before the smiles on their faces slowly faded away, gradually replaced by solemn looks. Marshall Peak. Chapter 6002. Response. While the millions of human race soldiers were making the trek back home, all the Ninth Order Masters gathered aboard the only intact purifying black ink warship remaining. Compared to their peak, the number of Ninth Order Masters had undoubtedly decreased significantly, with many of the recently advanced Ninth Order Masters having perished in the battle. Only 20 or so had managed to survive. Apart from the Ninth Order Masters, Fu Guang was also invited. Everyone took their seats. Most of them were still injured, their auras weak and unstable. The battle ended not that long ago, and even with the recuperative abilities of Ninth Order Masters, it was impossible for them to fully recover in such a short time, especially since the human race was running low on supplies, especially recovery pills. One by one, the Ninth Order Masters noticed the heavy air. They might not have an idea as to why Supreme Commander Mi had gathered all of them together, but they could tell that bad news was in store for them from his expression. After the last Ninth Order Master took their seat, Mi Jingluan finally started addressing the crowd. "I've summoned you here today to confirm something." He looked around, paused for a moment, then recounted his conversation with Xiang Shan. When the Ninth Order Masters heard this, some were confused, some were lost in thought, and a few who realized the issue right away furrowed their brow. Yang Lai casually asked, "What's there to fret about with your conversation with Big Head Xiang?" He did not find anything wrong. It sounded just a normal chat to him. "There's a big problem." Mi Jingluan stared at him with a solemn expression, causing Yang Lai to realize the gravity of the situation, despite not understanding what was the problem. Xiang Shan explained, "The peace treaty we signed with the Black Ink clan back then was of paramount importance and could be said to be the turning point in the entire war. It is impossible for Brother Mi and I to forget the details of such an important matter. It would have been nothing if it was just one of us having a hard time recalling certain trivial points of the treaty, but the problem is that neither of us can remember them. When we were discussing the treaty, both of us were unable to immediately recall even some of the basic details of the agreement. That should be absolutely impossible." Yang Lai speculated, frowning. "Maybe you're too tired from the battle?" Xiang Shan focused his gaze on him. "Do you remember the first time you met Yang Kai?" "Of course I remember," Yang Lai replied readily. "How could I forget such a thing?" At that time he slowly stopped talking. Obviously, he too had noticed the problem as his expression changed and a furrow appeared on his brow. Xiang Shan then turned to the other Ninth Order Masters and asked, "Everyone, why don't you try recalling your encounters with Yang Kai, or some common knowledge about him?" The Ninth Order Masters complied. Soon, a bewildered look took over everyone's face. Observing everyone's expressions, Yang Lai immediately understood that they too had encountered the same situation as him. He could not help but mumble, "How is this possible?" When Xiang Shan asked him to, Yang Lai attempted to recall the first time he met Yang Kai, but he actually couldn't immediately remember it. It was as if his memory was blocked by an invisible barrier. It was right on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't enunciate it for some reason. After struggling for a few breaths, he finally remembered that the first time he met Yang Kai was outside Great Evolution Pass. At that time, Yang Lai was on a scouting mission with his disciples, and Yang Kai arrived to meet him under Xiang Shan's orders. At that time, Yang Kai was only a 7th Order Master. Mi Jingluan's voice sounded in everyone's ears. "It's not just you. After Brother Xiang and I discovered this problem, we ordered our men to ask the soldiers the same questions, and they too encountered the same situation. Regardless of whether they personally met with Yang Kai or simply heard stories about him, they were unable to immediately recall the details." "What caused this phenomenon?" Wu Qing asked in a low voice. He had just tried to recall things about Yang Kai, and it was indeed as Mi Jingluan had described. "I don't know the exact reason, but I'm certain it has something to do with his shadow technique," Mi Jingluan continued. "Everyone should remember that Yang Kai said that the 8 shadows were summoned from the next 8,000 years. He also said that because those 8 shadows were destroyed, it meant that he would not exist for the next 8,000 years. Everyone nodded in acknowledgement as all of them were present when Mi Jingluan and Yang Kai were discussing this. Yang Kai said that it was the price he paid to use the shadow technique, but now it seems that Yang Kai himself had underestimated the severity of this price. He thought that the price he had to pay would be to disappear for the next 8,000 years, but in reality, some kind of invisible force is slowly erasing all traces of his existence from this world. So, anything related to him would slowly become blurred in the memories of others. Is such a thing really possible? Yang Lai found it hard to believe the most direct way one would think that removing the traces of a person's existence in this world meant was to kill that person, but the elimination that everyone encountered now was no longer as simple as just killing Yang Kai. Even their memories of him were being lost. Mi Jingluan added, "Before Yang Kai used the shadow technique, even I hadn't expected for such a bizarre secret technique to exist." Yang Lai immediately fell silent. The mysteries of the shadow technique were beyond their comprehension, so the price for using it was also unfathomable. As such, no matter how unbelievable Mi Jingluan's speculations were, there was indeed a possibility they were true. This is just the beginning. What I'm worried about is we might even forget everything about Yang Kai with time. All of the Ninth Order Masters were shocked. As the greatest hero who led the human race to victory and defeated Mo, Yang Kai should be remembered for all generations. But if the human race were to completely forget about him, that would truly be a tragic misfortune. What will happen if we completely forget about Yang Kai? Mi Jingluan asked. No one could answer. He didn't ask any more and instead postulated. Before disappearing, Yang Kai said that he would return after 8,000 years, but even he did not sound certain of that. So, he might be able to return, or he might completely disappear. Right now, the traces of his existence are slowly being erased, which is akin to him disappearing. If one day everyone completely forgets about him, perhaps he might never appear again. Fu Guang, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. Supreme Commander Mi, do you mean to say that if many people in this world remember him and his fame remains widespread, perhaps it can help him return? Mi Jingluan shook his head. I'm not sure, but it is possible. Then it's worth a shot. Fu Guang nodded. However, the most important thing right now is to investigate the speed at which his traces are being erased. Only by confirming this matter can we make appropriate arrangements. Agreed. Agreed. We'll do as Supreme Commander Mi says. After many days of investigation by Ninth Order Masters and questioning thousands of randomly selected soldiers, everyone reached an unfortunate conclusion. The speed at which Yang Kai's traces were being erased was increasing. More and more things related to Yang Kai were being forgotten. At this rate, everything related to Yang Kai would be completely gone in short order. By then, no one in this world would remember that there was once a hero who had saved the entire human race. Mi Jingluan couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He immediately sent people back to the original location of the primordial heaven source Grand Restriction to inform Su Yan and the others who were staying there. Although Su Yan and the others would most likely notice this on their own, it was always better to be prepared. An advance team had already been sent back to relay the news of their victory to the human race forces in the rear, so a joyful mood was already spreading. When the army returned, they were naturally received with warmth and celebration. The human race army had suffered heavy casualties in this battle, losing more than 60% of its soldiers. Be that as it may, it was all worth it, as in the future, the world would no longer face the threat of black ink strength. But contrary to the expectations of everyone who had remained behind, the Crusade force showed no signs of celebrating after their return. Instead, they quickly dispersed as if there was a new mission waiting for them. Soon, great statues were erected in the Star Boundary, Myriad Monsters world, and everywhere else the human race lived, whether it was a village, a town, or a city. The statue depicted a brave and heroic man wielding a long spear that seemed to have a dragon coiling around it. This man seemed to be staring down an invisible enemy, confronting them in battle. At the base of the statue was Yang Kai's name. Meanwhile, Mi Jingluan entered High Heaven Palace, and with the cooperation of Hua Qingxi and Xiaoning Chong, gathered all the people who had close relationships with Yang Kai. Afterwards, under Mi Jingluan's supervision, they jointly wrote a biography. Naturally, it was Yang Kai's biography, and it included all the big and small matters that had happened in his life. There were no excessively embellished accounts in it, just the simple and factual descriptions. Nonetheless, anyone who read this biography would understand how magnificent Yang Kai's life was. Everyone would come to know that in the darkest era of the human race, it was he who tore through the darkness and brought a bright ray of hope to them. They would also come to know that Yang Kai had ultimately paid a huge price to finally defeat the ancient being named Mo and end the war between the two races that had lasted for millions of years. Most importantly, they would know that the world could not forget him. Otherwise, he would never be able to return. After this biography was written, countless copies of it were made by High Heaven Palace disciples and distributed to all the places where the human race lived, especially the places where Yang Kai's statue was erected. The Ninth Order Masters even personally placed these jade slips containing Yang Kai's biography into the statues. This way, as long as someone examined the statue, they would be able to immediately perceive the contents of the jade slip and understand Yang Kai's life experiences. Many of the human race's upper echelons were trying their best to prevent the human race from forgetting their greatest hero, Yang Kai. On top of that, the Ninth Order Master once again convened a meeting after the army had returned. Everyone felt that the world was vast and time was difficult to measure, So they decided that the year the Crusade force returned to the star boundary would be designated as the first year of the Void Era. Void was a title, the title of one of the greatest heroes that was slowly being forgotten. As time passed away, new generations of humans were born, matured, and aged. Everyone had already forgotten about Xueqi, even the Ninth Order masters who had fought alongside him, but the statues that had been erected remained standing tall. Marshall Peak. Chapter 6003. 8,000 Years. Void Era, Year 7, 999. The star boundary, where High Heaven Cave Heaven, which was ranked first among the 36 cave heavens, was located, had its ban on entry lifted. Immediately, countless cultivators who were waiting outside the star boundary swarmed in and spread out. The cultivators were entering the star boundary from every possible direction, and were in huge numbers. Although there were all sorts of people among the crowd, no one dared to act rashly on the star boundary. No matter what their temperament was, they had become kind and simple after setting foot onto this universe world. This wasn't just because the star boundary was the domain of the strongest cave heaven, but also because Tao temples of all the other cave heavens and paradises were located here. It could be said that one could find 7th Order masters casually walking the streets in the star boundary. Even 8th Order masters were as common as dogs. Only the sighting of the legendary 9th Order masters, who generally remained hidden, would cause some minor sensation. If anyone acted irreverently here, not to mention the sun tomorrow, he or she might not even see the moon tonight. The main reason why the star boundary was so lively was because the Void Festival that was celebrated once every millennia would be held here. Many of the younger generation didn't know the origins of this festival, only that a ceremony was held at the turn of every millennium of the Void Era, and it had been celebrated 7 times already. And if the one that was about to be held was also counted, this would be the 8th. Rumor had it that 8,000 years ago, the living environment of the human race was extremely harsh. At that time, there was a species called the Black Ink clan that nearly wiped out the human race and conquered the known universe. Back then, the human race was truly on the verge of extinction. However, thanks to its many great heroes and brave soldiers, the human race slowly regained their footing. In the end, the entire human race launched a grand crusade and completely eradicated the Black Ink clan. From then on, the human race became the true rulers of this world. As for the Void Festival, it was held to commemorate all the humans who gave their lives in the war against the Black Ink clan. It could be considered the biggest event in the entire human race. The festival would be celebrated for an entire year, during which anyone could freely enter the star boundary. It had to be known that as the territory of the strongest cave heaven, it was normally forbidden for outsiders to enter. This wasn't because High Heaven Cave Heaven was tyrannical, but because they had no other choice. Since the end of the Great War 8,000 years ago, although the human race had managed to quell the Black Ink disaster that had lasted for millions of years, they had paid an extremely heavy price. Countless masters had died in battle, while the entire 3,000 worlds had been devastated by the Black Ink clan. The only universe worlds suitable for the survival of the human race were the ones in High Heaven territory and the Myriad Monsters territory. The number of habitable universe worlds had been significantly reduced, and as such, the living environment had also suffered. Cultivation resources were also in short supply. As such, the birth of too many cultivators would inevitably lead to chaos. So, the current cultivators could no longer be as unrestrained as they were before the Black Ink clan invaded the 3,000 worlds. Everything had to be done in a planned manner. 8,000 years ago, the Ninth Order masters had jointly held a discussion and reached a consensus, which was that anyone with the aptitude to cultivate would have to report to the cave heavens and paradises, and their cultivation matters would be arranged by one of these top forces. This decision was strictly enforced with the joint efforts of all the human race forces. So, all cultivators of the human race, regardless of their background or cultivation, were duly noted and recorded. This decision made the already special star boundary even more exclusive. The star boundary had a world tree clone, and was the first open heaven realm cradle. The second open heaven realm cradle was the Myriad Monsters world. In the years when the human race was fighting the Black Ink clan, the 2 open heaven realm cradles, the star boundary and Myriad Monsters world, had given birth to many high-rank open heaven realm masters. It could be said that these 2 open heaven realm cradles played a huge role in the human race's victory in the final battle. However, after the war ended, because of the limited inhabitable areas, it was difficult for the human race to withstand the birth of so many new generation cultivators, which put the star boundary and myriad monster world in an extremely awkward position. After returning from the crusade and realizing this problem, the human race's higher-ups made another decision, which was to withdraw everyone from the star boundary and myriad monster world, especially the large number of ordinary people. These ordinary people could not cultivate, but given their huge numbers, they could give birth to many children, some of which would have the aptitude for cultivation. If restrictions weren't put in place, it wouldn't be long before new generations of cultivators were born, which would inevitably lead to unnecessary unrest. Even the people who remained in the star boundary and myriad monsters world were forbidden from having children. If they wanted to have children, they would have to leave these two open heaven realm cradles. Of course, the human race's upper echelons also knew that cutting off all avenues forward was not sustainable, so they left behind a glimmer of hope. That hope lay in the Void Festival that was held every 1,000 years. During this one-year-long grand festival, everyone was allowed to freely enter and exit the star boundary. If one could join one of the Tao temples of the various cave heavens and paradises, they would naturally be qualified to remain in the star boundary to cultivate. It was difficult to calculate how many people had entered the star boundary every time the grand festival started, but the number who could truly worship the various Tao temples was not that high. This led to a strange phenomenon, which was that many pregnant women or young married couples would enter the star boundary during the festival. Those pregnant women would then find a place with excellent world energy and live with their families, nourishing their fetus in peace, so that their unborn babies could enjoy the feedback from the World Tree clone. As for those young couples, they were only 2 when they arrived, but when they left, their wives' stomachs would most likely be bulging. Jade Mountain Square, an extremely common market in the star boundary. Because of the decisions made in the past, a large number of humans were relocated away from the star boundary, leaving it quite sparsely populated. Owing to which, places like Jade Mountain Square were usually deserted. In other words, this place was only bustling with humans because the grand festival was approaching and countless people had poured into the star boundary. A young couple was strolling around the market, holding hands. The man was suave and handsome, whereas the woman was as beautiful as a flower. They were a perfect match. The woman's belly happened to be slightly bulging. She was obviously pregnant. At this moment, the husband and wife arrived before a tall statue and looked up. The wife kept reaching out to her husband's hand, who helplessly handed her the food in his hands and grumbled, "I told you not to eat so many sweets, why don't you listen?" His wife didn't even spare him a glance and bit down on the candied fruit in her hand, mumbling, "Who says I am the one who wants to eat it? Clearly it's the child in my stomach who wants to eat." The husband couldn't help but roll his eyes. Every time she brought up the child in her womb, he couldn't do anything about it. "Dear, do you think this Yongkai really exists?" The wife quickly finished a stick of candied fruit and took another stick from her husband's hand. "Why are his statues everywhere?" Wherever they went, wherever a human settlement was present, they always found such statues. Rumor had it that these statues had been standing for nearly 8,000 years and had not been eroded by the passage of time at all. Obviously, they were protected by the power of an expert. "How would I know?" the husband brusquely replied. His wife muttered to herself, "His biographies are everywhere, and it seems that everyone has read it intensively." Moreover, according to his biography, he used some kind of profound space-time secret technique in order to defeat the ancient enemy, which caused all traces of him to be erased from people's minds, and that he would never be able to return if everyone truly forgot about him. Counting the time, it just so happens that when this festival starts, it will be the time for him to return. "Dear, why don't we go take a look?" The husband's face darkened. "Why are you looking for him? He's a hero. We humans can have today thanks to his efforts and sacrifices. It's only right that we pay respect to him. His biography has been passed down for 8,000 years, who knows if it's true or not. I think he must be a wise and mighty man." Crunch, crunch. "Why are you eating my candied fruit? So sour. It's obviously very sweet." According to his biography, he had many wives. "Humph, you finally exposed your wild ambitions. My dear child, your father doesn't want us anymore. Our lives are really miserable." "No, that's not what I said. Don't be ridiculous." Everywhere where the humans were gathered, similar conversations were happening between the young couples. Under the vigorous promotion and maintenance of various major sects, the biography compiled by Mi Jing Luan, had been widely circulated these past 8,000 years. It could be said that any human older than 10 had read Yang Kai's biography at least once. As far as the later generation was concerned, this biography was just a storybook, allowing them to understand the magnificent life of a man named Yang Kai. As for whether the records in this biography were true or fabricated, no one could confirm. This was something even the ancient cultivators of the cave heavens and paradises were unable to determine, because in their memories, many of the things recorded in the biography had indeed happened, but none of them had the slightest impression of the man named Yang Kai being there. If this was really the backlash of the so-called shadow secret technique, it would be too terrifying. Meanwhile, the Ninth Order Masters had gathered at High Heaven Palace. Compared to the crusade back then, the number of Ninth Order Masters had undoubtedly increased. There were more than 100 Ninth Order Masters. After all those rising stars, who possessed the aptitude to advance to the Ninth Order Open Heaven realm, had gradually advanced over the last 8,000 years. In the main hall, everyone was talking in small groups. Unless there was something important, the Ninth Order Masters seldom gathered together. The Ninth Order Masters also rarely appeared in public. Only a grand event like the Void Festival could gather all the Ninth Order Masters together. With over 100 Ninth Order Masters, the human race's foundation had reached a peak that it had not seen in over 10,000 years. Whether it was the newly advanced Ninth Order Masters, or the old veterans, all of them had participated in the war against the Black Ink clan. Now that they had gathered together, it was only natural for them to reminisce about the glorious past and as they watched the current generation compete against each other. Ouyang Lai was especially boisterous as he moved through the crowd. When he started talking about the great battles he had fought in the past, he unceasingly beamed with joy. When he got excited, he even pulled his disciple, Gong Lian, over. In the past, when this old master was only an 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master, when I fought against a pseudo-royal lord alone, that pseudo-royal lord wet his pants in terror. This brat saw it with his own eyes. Hey, tell them. Martial Peak. Chapter 6004. Chanting. Gong Lian, who was still called Brat by Ouyang Lai, had already reached the Ninth Order. Basically, his cultivation was the same as Ouyang Lai's, but as there was still a master and disciple relationship between them. Even if he was a Ninth Order Master, he could not go against Ouyang Lai. So, he could not help but nod his confirmation after hearing this. Honored Master is telling the truth. Ouyang Lai's laughter became even more carefree. A few of the newly advanced Ninth Order Masters also started laughing, all of them knowing how Ouyang Lai loved to brag and deciding to just go along with it. All of them had witnessed or experienced the might of a pseudo-royal lord firsthand, and it was definitely not something an 8th Order Master could contend with, unless they formed a battle formation. Be that as it may, back when there weren't many 8th Order Masters, Ouyang Lai had indeed fought a pseudo-royal lord alone, and it was him who was beaten to the point that he had wet his pants. Even so, fighting a pseudo-royal lord alone was still an incredible feat in itself. At that moment, the noisy hall suddenly fell silent. Everyone stopped blowing their own trumpet and raised their eyes, looking directly above. In that direction was a calm and composed, half-white-haired Ninth Order Master with a smile on his lips. He swept his gaze over everyone before addressing them. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been 1,000 years since we last met, but it seems everyone's noble bearing is still the same. There are also a few new faces, very good. Everyone greeted with a bow. Greetings, Supreme Commander Mi. The person who had arrived was none other than Mi Jingluan. Although the human race's crusade force and the various armies had been disbanded, Mi Jingluan's title of Supreme Commander had remained. In terms of cultivation, Mi Jingluan might not be the strongest Ninth Order Master, but in every battle against the Black Ink clan, he had played a far greater role than any other Ninth Order Master. There was no battle in which he had not racked his brain hard to map out a strategy for victory, and it was he who had ultimately coordinated and dispatched the various troops. He was a cultivator of the same era as Ouyang Lai, Xiang Shan, and Wei Junyang, but if they were to stand together, Mi Jingluan would definitely look older because he had been under even greater stress and for a longer duration during the thousands of years of war. Above the main hall, Mi Jingluan returned the greeting before continuing. It's the day of the Void Festival. Counting the time, this is already the 8th celebration, and I'm sure everyone knows what this means. Hearing this, everyone's expressions became solemn. For a long time, there have been gaps in our memories. There appears to be traces of a person's existence in many key memories, but whether it's us or others, none of us can remember this person. I don't know what kind of mood I was in when I oversaw the compilation of this person's biography, but now that I think about it, it was definitely the best decision I've ever made in my life. All the signs indicate that this person should have really existed, and that all the accounts in this person's biography should indeed be true. This person is the greatest contributor to the human race's victory over the Black Ink clan. Unlike the cultivators with low cultivation, although the Ninth Order masters present here had some gaps in their memories, these missing memories could be perfectly filled in by Yang Kai's biography. Therefore, they could conclude that Yang Kai really did exist and the records in his biography were not fabricated. The reason they had forgotten about Yang Kai was because of the mysteries of the shadow secret technique. A hero cannot be allowed to be forgotten. Otherwise, the current human race does not deserve to live. 8,000 years have already passed, and it is time for him to return. The void ceremony has been conducted precisely for this moment. Everyone, the arrangements we had laid back then should be used. It's time to witness the truth. The world only knew that the Void Festival ceremony was a grand event for the entire human race, but didn't know that it was a hidden hand Mi Jingluan and the other Ninth Order masters had arranged long ago. When they had set up this contingency back then, perhaps they had still not completely forgotten about Yang Kai, but now they really could not remember anything about him. It didn't matter if they didn't remember though, as long as the plan worked. Please instruct us, Supreme Commander Mi. The Ninth Order masters cupped their fists. Mi Jingluan lightly smiled. Then let us see if all of this is just an unrealistic conjecture on our part or if we really have forgotten something. One after another, the Ninth Order masters received their orders and flew out of the hall, quickly disappearing, leaving only one Ninth Order master behind. This was a titled Great Emperor recognized by the Star Boundary, and the only surviving Great Emperor who had managed to break through to the Ninth Order. There had been other Ninth Order Great Emperors from the Star Boundary, but they had all fallen during the Crusade. The hall sunk into complete silence as Mi Jingluan and the Great Emperor patiently waited. 10 days later, Mi Jingluan finally opened his eyes and glanced at the Ninth Order Great Emperor. It's about time. The Ninth Order Great Emperor slightly nodded before slowly closing his eyes and spreading his divine sense. The next instant, he had become one with the entire Star Boundary. Right then, in every settlement across the universe world, Yang Kai's statues, which had stood tall for 8,000 years, suddenly started glowing, attracting the attention of countless people. Soon after, a voice started to reverberate from the statue, chanting something. What the voice was reciting was the contents of Yang Kai's biography. The voice seemed to contain some kind of mysterious power, causing everyone who heard it to involuntarily stop in their tracks and quietly listen. As the chanting continued, an enormous picture scroll seemed to have filled everyone's vision. The picture scroll was impressively portraying the life of a cultivator named Yang Kai, and how he gradually grew to become the strongest, eventually leading the human race to defeat their enemies. Not just in the Star Boundary, even in Myriad Monsters territory, on every universe world where the humans lived, the setup in the statues was activated by the Ninth Order Masters. At this moment, that chanting was simultaneously ringing in the ears of trillions of humans. Once, twice, 3 times. Gradually, people began to read along the voice coming from the statue. Almost everyone had read Yang Kai's biography, and many scholars had even memorized it by heart. Only, the biography which in the past was only read to pass time was given heavy importance today. Trillions of humans were chanting the Void Great Emperor's real name. At the same time, in the distant Void, on the battlefield where the final battle between Yang Kai and Mo was fought, a few people were gathered together inside a floating palace. There weren't many people, only a dozen or so, but apart from a middle-aged couple, the lowest cultivation of the others was the Eighth Order, and there were actually quite a number of Ninth Order masters present. Everyone gathered here was Yang Kai's close relative. His parents, his wives, his disciples, Yang Xiao, Yang Xue. These people had been waiting here for 8,000 years. Xia Ningchong had originally stayed behind to guard High Heaven Palace because, despite her high cultivation, she had very little experience in fighting. Moreover, she was an alchemy great grandmaster and was more useful stationed in the rear. However, for the final crusade, even she was roped in. After their triumphant return, once Xia Ningchong had helped compile Yang Kai's biography with Mi Jingluan, she immediately returned here. Naturally, Mi Jingluan immediately set out to fetch all those close to Yang Kai, bringing Yang Yingfeng and Dong Suzhu here to meet up with Su Yan and the others to wait for Yang Kai's return. Their wait had now lasted for 8,000 years. Martial Peak. Chapter 6005. Supreme Master. The shadow technique's backlash struck without any notice, and was impossible to guard against. At first, Yang Kai's relatives could still remember him, but gradually, all their memories of him began to fade away, and eventually disappeared. One after another, gaps began to appear in everyone's memories. For a period of time, everyone had even forgotten why they had gathered here until they remembered that they were waiting for a very important person. As for who that person was, none of them had any impression of him. The biography that Xia Ning Chong brought back with her had a great effect. The things recorded in the biography and the remaining memories in their minds perfectly complemented each other. This helped them know that a person named Yang Kai had appeared in their lives, and that person held quite a huge place in their hearts. Not far from their location was a void corridor leading straight to chaotic dead territory. At this moment, a figure walked out from the void corridor. It was none other than Zhang Ruoxi. Ruoxi's cultivation was currently at the peak of the 9th order, though the wings on her back had disappeared due to separating from the power of yin and yang. Her Heaven's Order bloodline had been almost completely burned out in the final battle, so she was no longer able to maintain the delicate balance between the two opposing powers. So she had no choice but to return to chaotic dead territory and strip away the power of yin and yang. Although the loss of her Heaven's Order bloodline was a significant detriment to her, it didn't have much of an impact on her personal strength. It was just that it would be difficult for her to regain the phenomenal power she had displayed that time in the future. Walking out of the void corridor, and identifying her bearing, Ruoxi quickly arrived at Su Yan and the others' location. Noticing her appearance, everyone looked at her. "It's starting," Ruoxi stated softly. Everyone nodded as a solemn look took over their faces. On the platform in front of the palace, everyone sat down cross-legged and calmly started reciting Yang Kai's name. At first, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Over the past 8,000 years, everyone had done similar things countless times just to remind themselves not to forget that name. However, as time went by, a different feeling slowly began to rise in their hearts. Everyone felt suffocated, as if there was a mountain pressing down on them, one that was becoming heavier and heavier. As this suffocating feeling grew stronger and stronger, the forgotten emotions also began to awaken, and along with them, a painful longing gripped their hearts. No one knew who they were missing, and none of them had a clear picture of them in their heart, but they had this feeling that someone who had left a deep mark in their lives had been forgotten, and that person's name was Yang Kai. In a vivid and colorful mysterious void filled with chaos and distortions, a tall and stalwart man with a sword in his hands let out an angry roar before swinging it down. This sword strike almost cut the space-time river in two, revealing Yang Kai's flickering figure behind it. By the time the water rolled back after the strike, Yang Kai had already arrived before the sword-wielding man. He then raised his hand and pointed a finger towards the opponent, sending a wave of water towards the stalwart figure. The stalwart man's expression instantly changed. Having fought Yang Kai for thousands of years, he naturally understood the might of this seemingly unremarkable wave. This wave contained the might of 10,000 grand das, so even he didn't dare to let himself get swallowed by it. The stalwart man raised his sword and slashed out, shattering the incoming wave and splashing droplets of water flying in all directions. At the same time, the stalwart man quickly withdrew as if he was avoiding snakes and scorpions. Yang Kai didn't chase after him and simply stood in place. Yang Kai sighed in his heart. When he had used the shadow secret technique to defeat Mo and was corroded by the space-time Dao strength, he basically thought that he would fall into a deep slumber or something similar, but how could he have known he would appear in this mysterious place in the blink of an eye? After arriving here, Yang Kai began exploring and to his astonishment, he discovered he was not alone here. There were actually many other masters. These masters were no weaker than him, with some even being stronger. This revelation left him in total shock, because in the entire world, whether it was his cultivation or his comprehension of his grand Daos, no one could hold a candle to him. Even Mo, who had 30% of his source sealed, had been killed by him. So who in this universe could be his opponent? But here, there were many masters here who could exchange blows evenly with Yang Kai. What left him even more speechless was that the people here were all extremely belligerent. It did not matter whether there were any grievances between them or not. Once two parties met, a fight broke out at least 90% of the time. Battles seemed to become the prime motivation for the survival of the living beings here. In the beginning, Yang Kai had suffered quite a bit. But his situation gradually improved over time as his injuries healed and his comprehension of the 10,000 Grand Daras deepened. He also made a friend. That man's name was Xueqi, and he was also very powerful. When Yang Kai was being hunted down after first arriving, the man acted out of righteousness and helped him out. Through his conversation with Xueqi, Yang Kai finally understood that this was a place of exile for all masters who had touched upon the taboo. In other words, everyone who was here had touched upon the secrets of the heavens at one time or another. Yang Kai had summoned shadows from the future, which was a taboo. Although he didn't know what Xueqi had done, he was certain he had done something similar. As such, this place was simply dubbed the Taboo Realm. What's more, anyone who entered this place would be quickly forgotten by the outside world. All memories related to those who entered this place would be erased in short order. In the 3,000 worlds, there were definitely very few living beings who could compare to Yang Kai. Yang Kai then recalled the universe furnace and its process of creating new universe worlds, and immediately understood that the masters here all came from different worlds or even universes, ones far beyond the boundaries of the 3,000 worlds. Each and every one of them had reached the pinnacle of their strength in their own realm, and had even touched upon that which should not be touched. Yang Kai had once asked Xueqi how to escape this place, and the latter hid nothing. He knew more things than Yang Kai as he had arrived a bit earlier than him. According to him, it wasn't impossible to escape from this place. In fact, there were 2 methods to escape from here. However, whether these 2 methods really worked or not was still open to debate, because there had never been a precedent of anyone leaving this place. The first method was to continue fighting and kill the masters from other worlds. Perhaps if they killed enough of them, they might be able to leave. No one knew who proposed this idea, but it sounded a bit unreliable because there was no basis for it. The second method was much more plausible, and it was to have the people of your universe still remember you and wish for your return. A person will die twice in their lifetime. The first time is when their life ends, and the second time is when the last person who remembers forgets them. As far as we are concerned, we may still be alive here, but the world we used to live in no longer remembers us, so we are dead to that world. If we want to rise from the dead, enough people must remember you for you to break through the restrictions here. These were the exact words of Xueqi, and Yang Kai remembered them very clearly. At that time, Xueqi had been drinking the spirit wine he had taken out from his small universe while saying these words. Although this second method was much more reliable than the first, it was still impractical, because once someone entered this place, his or her respective universe would be affected by the restrictions, wiping every single memory related to him or her in a very short time. Once the memories were wiped out, everything was lost. Even if there were some written records left behind, they would just become dust in history over time. Saying so, Xueqi patted Yang Kai's shoulder. "Little brother, just stay here. Although there's no way out of here, it's still quite lively." It was indeed quite lively. Supreme masters of many worlds were gathered here, fighting non-stop every day. This kind of thing would be rarely seen in the outside world, but here it was a common occurrence. At that time, Yang Kai just responded to Xueqi in one sentence. "I will be able to get out. My world will never forget me." Xueqi looked at him like he was looking at an idiot and threw a sentence. "I'll be waiting for that day." Calculating the time, that day should be arriving soon. While Yang Kai was lost in a daze, the tall and stalwart man had returned at some point, and sent a fearsome sword wave at him, forcing him to dodge. From nearby, Xueqi's playful laughter rang out. "Yang Kai, don't die. If you die, I won't be able to watch the good show." He had already arrived a few days ago as promised, wanting to see if Yang Kai could really leave this place. Although he felt that Yang Kai didn't have much hope, since he made a deal, he naturally had to abide by it. Unexpectedly, someone came to seek revenge on Yang Kai at this point. Although it was called seeking revenge, the truth was that there was no great enmity between them. The sword-wielding man had fought with Yang Kai at least 100 times over the past few thousand years, and neither of them had been able to do anything to the other. But this time, he actually brought a companion, wanting to overwhelm Yang Kai with numbers. But unbeknownst to them, Xueqi happened to be together with Yang Kai. A battle had broken out immediately afterwards. Yang Kai was up against the sword-wielding stalwart man while Xueqi dealt with his companion. At this moment, A towering tree had emerged behind Chongjiu. It was gently swaying, glittering and shining as if it was cast from gold. One after another, its leaves whizzed through the void, cutting space apart. Its every move carried endless power. Chongjiu's opponent was forced to retreat every time he tried to press forward. After fighting for a while, the master couldn't help size up Chongjiu before asking, "The Dao tree lineage?" Chongjiu raised his brow. "You've seen it." The master continued, "The Dao tree lineage is famous throughout the heavens, and I had the honor of experiencing it firsthand once before." Saying so, he put away his weapon. "I won't fight anymore." Chongjiu smiled slightly. "I was thinking the same." Battles were common occurrences in the taboo realm, but there were many cases where a simple smile and greeting could wipe away all enmity. After all, everyone's strength was about the same, so unless there was some kind of irreconcilable grudge between them, no one was willing to really fight to the death. For example, someone like the sword-wielding stalwart man who repeatedly sought trouble with Yang Kai was actually quite rare. He kept attacking Yang Kai mainly because Yang Kai had only been here for a short time, and the sword-wielding man believed that he was an easy target. Owing to repeated battles, Yang Kai's strength had grown significantly over the past 8,000 years. This wasn't surprising though, as Yang Kai did not get the time to consolidate his foundation and perfect it after swallowing and refining Mu's space-time river before he was forced to fight Mo to the death. It wasn't until he had entered this place and fought battle after battle that Yang Kai finally digested the benefits he had obtained from Mu's final gift. Furthermore, his small universe's foundation was constantly increasing. If he was allowed to go 8,000 years back in time to deal with Mo, he would definitely not end up as miserable as before. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.